punch me, right?
Okay, good evening. Good evening, Commissioner Samaria. Thank you. Okay, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. Officer Caserta.
Hi, good evening. Mayor Trupman,
Here.
Vice Mayor Johnson Sardella, she's not here. Commissioner Samaria, Commissioner Tudor,
Here.
and Commissioner Wise.
Stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Correct. Well, I'm going to say correct. Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a workshop on discussing the Swale ordinance, or the section we've been, several commissions have tried, and I'm hoping we can succeed in finally coming to a consensus among the community of what we'd like to do. All of you should have the developments actually outlined in this evening's workshop. The first goal is to develop codes that maintain the function and use of the swales as a public right-of-way. The second goal is to allow flexibility of use without creating any additional safety and liability issues for the village and the property owners. The first objective is to obtain input from the work done by the Code Review Board as presented by Gage. Unfortunately, Gage tonight was sick, so he's unable to attend. I believe all of you have a copy of the last version that was done by the Code Review Board.
For those of you that don't, there are copies right on the corner of the table in front of the chief.
Does anybody not have a copy?
The second objective is to review and build a consensus as to the three main areas of the proposed ordinance from the work of the last commission. Development of the swale portion of the public right-of-way as a parking surface and maintenance. The second is regulation and enforcement of the vehicles parking in the swales. And the last is landscaping and maintenance of the swales. Normally we open up for public comments. What I thought might be useful, since we're trying to get through a large amount of material in a short amount of time, if my colleagues do not have an objection, is for us to go through this, open up for public comments so that the public can hear what we're thinking, and then the public will comment, and then we can adjust if we want to change. So if there's no objection to that, there are 3 sections, so there'll be 3 times for which public will have comments. Okay, so that instead of talking once for 3 minutes, you can talk for 3 different sections, so you can address specific concerns that you may have on each one of these sections. Is there any objections from my colleagues? Okay. So we'll start with development of the swale for parking standards. The first one is determination of the need for development of parking for the swale. There are 4 main criteria. Currently, property owners have existing driveways on private property and have needs for additional visitor or residential parking. The second criteria is current property owners have existing tandem driveways on private property but want a location to park residents or visitors parking when needed. Actually, 1 and 2 are pretty much the same. The only difference is there's a lot of conversation that goes on with tandem parking where you have to pull out, and then you have to have a spot to put your car in order for the cars to switch. The third and fourth one is current property owner does not have an existing driveway at all on private property, but does not have the lot configuration or has other issues that require the use of the swale parking. And the last one is the current property owner does have an existing driveway, does not have an existing driveway on private property, but just prefers to park on it even though they have the ability to have that private parking. And the question is, should we allow or not allow that? So for that, I'll just open it up to my colleagues. Staff?
Okay, for these 4 items, I mean, all of that staff pretty much agrees with. On item number 3, we'd like to look into that really could be handled through an administrative variance. Item 4 is, should we allow or not? And the staff opinion, today when we met was that would be okay if the swale would accommodate it.
That's correct. On number 4.
You're on.
On question 4. We don't see a problem parking on swale, but again, if there's criteria, and what I mean by criteria means if the swale allows it by saying, look, you're 3 feet away from the edge of pavement, you're not blocking visibility, you're in a situation that fits, or you're not close to the stop sign, stuff like that, as long as it fits that criteria, we don't have a problem with it. It's just making sure that area swale does fit that criteria. And unfortunately, some locations are going to be yes, and some locations are not going to be able to meet that criteria.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Commissioner Tudor?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think ideally it would be nice if there was no swale development for parking. I mean, aesthetically it would be nice. However, given the lot sizes, the configurations, the reality we live in is that there's going to be a need for some type of swale development. The key is going to be addressing issues like sightline, pedestrian safety, since we don't have, it's on. Even though we currently don't have any type of pedestrian walkways or anything so residents are walking in the street. So we're going to have figure out some way to address that so that somebody walking down the street or walking with their kids or pushing a stroller can actually step off, don't have to worry about stepping off the road into the side of a vehicle. So we probably want to offset the swale parking, and we also have to make sure about the visibility triangle aspect. But yeah, I think at this point in time, it's not a question of should we allow swale parking development, but how much and what the criteria is going to be.
Okay.
Yep, I'm in agreement with Commissioner Tudor on that, and if we could look to your expertise, David, to speak to us as to what the specifications would be to accommodate any pedestrians who might be endangered by parallel swale parking. That's something that we could add in. I know some people have, as it says here, existing swale parking. Are they grandfathered in and left alone? Do they need to be brought up to a new safety standard? That's something that I'd like to hear your perspective on.
There are numerous.
You just turned your off. You don't
have to touch it.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's numerous locations that we have, and I agree. Definitely from the edge of pavement, as an example, from the edge of pavement, you need to have at least 3 feet. So when somebody comes in and is tandem parking and they open the door, they're not, walking out into the driving surface lane. So there's got to have to be some type of buffer. But I agree with you. We don't have sidewalks. So there are going to be situations where we need to have a clear pathway also to walk, because right now everybody's at nighttime, especially at nighttime, they're basically walking on the driving surface lane. So the city is very unique when it comes to the right of way, and it's I want to it's basically how the commission wants to direct us into how do we go about it. But my biggest concern is always going to be safety. So again, the criteria is going to be that if we allow swale parking, it's going to be something that is identifying each individually situation more than say, what are we going to do on 8th Avenue? How are we going to treat 10th Avenue? How are we going to treat 9th Court? So it depends on the constraints that we have out there.
We are unique in the village in that our swales vary in depth on a lot of properties, and so we can have we can have a 20-foot swale on one street on one property, and at the other end of the street it can be much more narrow than that. So it really does. It's hard to do this all as a blanket because it's kind of comparing apples to cats in some instances.
Do you know the distance that we have, the minimum and maximum distance we have? Do we have a number for that? Like, in other words, I don't know. I'm asking. Is there a 5-foot swale on one spot and a 20 on another? Do we have an actual range?
Yes.
Yeah, well, again, from the property line,
Right, do we know an actual distance? of
you
that?
said about 12 feet. In some cases no, some cases is 8, and other cases, and I want to bring this to everybody's attention, I want to be clear. I would say about 60% of your city, there's a lot of hedging that overlaps into the swales and the public right-of-way. So again, that's going to be another cost and effect, because if you have existing hedging and tree planting, okay, on these swales, and yet, obviously the property owner is the one that's responsible to maintain these swales, there's going to be a lot of restrictions on where you're going to be able to park, so that's going to be an issue. A lot of the existing swales that we have, the property owners at the present time have a lot hedges overlapping into those swales. So that's a concern.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, do you have anything else you want to add? I'm sorry.
No, I mean, Mr. Hernandez said it well. I mean, that's a lot of property owners have planted right on the property line, and as the plants have matured, they're now consuming a portion of the swale as well. So that's something that we'll have to decide whether that's grandfathered, whether they need to trim back, how much they need to trim back, and so forth as well as we look at this.
Question I have.
Commissioner Samir?
The question I have was, did we already have an ordinance that says what you can plant on the swales already in code?
I believe we do, but by the same token, people have planted not on the swale on their property, but right on the edge, so that as the plant matures and grows, it fills into the swale as well. It's not planted on the swale, but the branches and so forth grow out into
But
the swale.
if we already have a code that says that, then that's just that maintenance that they're violating. I don't understand why we need to change. I mean, if it's already in code that says, you can't do this on the swale, and if it goes over, that's your responsibility, maintenance, to keep it clean.
And if I may, we are going to actually address that third. So
Yeah.
maybe we should address, if we can, I know we're going to have a lot of overlap between these topics, but if we can, for everybody's sake, we're going to start with development of the swale for parking standards, then we're going to go into the parking regulations, and then we're going to go into the actual landscaping, because I know the landscaping is definitely one of the more problematic features of this, if that's okay with everybody. Okay? All right, so on number 4, because 4 is the one questionable one. Is there anybody who has an objection to allowing property owners to have swale parking when they have the ability to have it on their own property first?
I think currently we have it where once it's 50% deteriorated, it has to be torn up, and I think that should be the case. I don't think we want to,
No, what I'm asking, it's a different question. What I'm asking is, does anybody have, for number 4, does anybody have an objection that if you have the ability to make private parking, but you prefer to develop your swale, that you'll allow that to happen first? Because originally, when we had talked as a commission, we had wanted them to develop on the private property first, and then if there's a need, to put it onto public right away. That is my position on this.
Development on the swell should be secondary. The primary parking surface should be on the private property, and any type of swell development should be secondary to that. That's my opinion.
Commissioner Wise?
And that you are, Commissioner Tudor, even in cases where they don't have a driveway at all? Are we talking about?
We're saying that if you look at the difference between 3 and 4, the only difference is the 4 says I can actually I have spots all over my private park, I can do it, but then...
You have space, you have a big green lawn, but no driveway.
Right, and you've
Right.
always had swale parking, and now we're saying you have to develop a driveway, because there's 2 scenarios. One is I have an existing swale, but I don't have a parking.
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
So just hypothetical, you've got a big green lawn, you've been parking on your swale, the swale parking surface is over 50% deteriorated, you have to do something about it, you cannot refurbish that swale, you must now put a driveway on your property.
Okay, so it is private first.
I'm asking if that's, am I correct in what we're talking about here? So we have a homeowner, hypothetically, who's lived here for 30 years and has always parallel parked on a parking surface on a swale. It has become dramatically deteriorated. It has to be refurbished because they're being cited. But because of the hypothetical that Commissioner Tudor is stating, or the position that Commissioner Tudor is stating, that person could not fix that swale without first putting a driveway on their property.
Correct.
Okay, I'm not in favor of that.
Okay. All right, so we have 2 yeses and 2 nos, but we're not voting. So we have definitely, that's something that'll have to be worked out. Okay?
Okay.
All right, next is the process. The next is the process.
And process can really be handled at the staff level. That's all stuff that we will set up internally.
Right, but I think I just want to make sure we're in consensus that if you can automatically get a swale parking, you just go through the normal permit process, which is what the item says. The only thing that was added was at the request, I believe, of Mr. Hernandez, which talked about a must be approved or complied with by designee. Previously, we would put it through P&Z, and that would be it. Now we are going to have, because we have somebody who knows all about what the public right-of-way is, we're going to have an additional process where they have to go through and approve it.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? So it's like a departmental internal.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll all be reviewing it. So.
Okay, and then the last one is obviously, which you already spoke to, was if 3 and/or 4 are done, it's going to go through administrative process followed by the permit process. So that would be how that would go. Does anybody have an objection to any of that? Okay. Then we'll move on to design specification.
Discussion.
Can we have discussion in reference to this? You said
Do you want to, the way we originally talked about doing it was you want to do A, that would be, I was going to do A, B, and then C.
I think it'd probably be better
To do each one?
to do it in smaller bites, so
Okay.
we covered A, then get public
That's fine.
feedback, have the
fine.
interaction, and then...
If anybody would like to comment on any of items A under number 1, please come on up.
First of all, you said somehow the commission's there was for a couple of years, a long time ago, because I have the minutes are from 2000.
I'm sorry, could you wait a second, because your mic is not working for some reason. Can we get her another mic? Do we have another mic?
They all should have batteries. They're all brand new.
Is this working?
All right. The code that came out of the workshop is in Unicode right now. The way you make that it was bouncing around and
That's not working.
it was a consensus from the community. The commission that was there in 2015 approved it, and there was one paragraph that had to do with parking on the swale that was changed. Just some of the wording, which eliminated the parking on the swale and only having the paved parking approach. And the attorney said, I think you ought to just, stop this, remove this, and start looking at this, and that's when this all started. And there was nothing wrong with the code that's on the books now. And for you to start all over again, throwing in all this extra garbage, is coming from you. From Tracy, I spoke to enough times to know half of these things that are online now, that you have as the backup material, were things restricting people parking on the swale, not allowing asphalt, all these things, not allowing parking on the swale. One of the big problems is when Christina wrote the backup for that red line originally with the definitions, she said, for this code, we're going to consider swale
Mr.
parking,
Manners, please switch that.
swale parking and right-of-way.
I'm sorry, Barbara.
Okay, is this on? There you go. Okay, the swale is public property. Off-street parking and a lot refers to private land. You cannot clump the two together. They're not dealt with at the same time. When the code said on private property, on your lot, off-street parking, grass was not an acceptable parking surface.
it meant for your yard. You couldn't park in your front yard. It didn't mean you couldn't park on grass on the swale. And it says 40% can be impervious on the swale. And it meant that if you wanted to put gravel on the swale, you were allowed to do it. It didn't say you could only park on 40% of your swale. And as far as I'm concerned, I spent too many years going over this, and it was agreed to by the commission. The workshop endorsed this, and as far as I'm concerned, if you change that one paragraph and change it to parking surfaces rather than just the driveway approach, it'll be fine.
Thank you.
Chuck Ross. Since we're confining our comments to just these sections at the moment, let's just address number 4. The original purpose of the driveway ordinance was try to get people to stop parking on the swale and park on their property. And as Commissioner Tudor put it perfectly, it was that if you don't have any other place to park, I don't know if that's what you got to, but then we would be able to park in the swale. But if you have, as you say here, if you do not have existing driveway or parking on the property, that's the main objective, to get people to park on the property. Also, there were people parking on the lawn. We wanted to get people to stop parking on the lawn. And the last resort was to park in the swale. That was what the point was, because the swale is public property. It's a public right-of-way. So that's the last resort. And it was to try to, and then, as Barbara says, and I agree with most of what Barbara says, that we were just trying to tweak the original ordinance that was on the books, not recreate the whole thing. But somehow we got into this for the last 2 years where we're trying to redo something that probably could have been put to bed a long, long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you.
Derek Hill, 777 Northeast under 11th Street. Which one's the working one? Neither one? Okay, I'll just speak really loudly.
No, on the right. Gary, on the right.
On the right? Oh, okay. Chuck is wrong. I rarely disagree with Chuck, but he's absolutely wrong. That was not the objective at all. The objective was clearly to keep people from parking on their front lawns. Yes. Okay? It was not to create driveways. And I've got to say at this point that while you're busy trying to reinvent the wheel, we haven't enforced a code that's been in existence for 4 years. We don't have people maintain their driveways. We don't have people maintain their swales. And people continue to park on their front lawns. So while you belabor this and try to make it worse and more restrictive, for 4 years you haven't even maintained what's on the books. You should stick with what's on the books and you should enforce it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, if something deteriorates, 50% rule has precedence. It's also in the fence ordinance. For those of us who are on corners, if our fence deteriorates more than 50%, we now have to move that fence in. So this is not something new. And I think the village needs to look forward to, there are certain properties that, yes, putting in a driveway would just be beyond bizarre. It would look worse than any developed swale you could imagine. They've got to be able to have a method to be absolved from that. But for anybody else, I'm sorry, if you have allowed a 50% deterioration of your one and only parking surface, then it is time to revamp. And again, we have precedents here. It is in other ordinances. Take a look at the fence ordinance. It is a major impact for corner lots if people let their fences go more than 50%. Now you've got to come way in and you lose a whole lot of your backyard. It's what we need to do to raise the bar a little.
Thank you, Jane.
Good evening. David Raymond, 11520 Northeast 9th Avenue. And let me just ask, we're talking about the document that's development of standards for swales just in 1A?
1A is all we're talking about.
Okay. So just within the context, I'll try to stick to A, but just in the overall context, when it comes to the swales, I guess the overall question, to take a step back, is how do you all know what the swales are? Because it's very, I can tell you, we have a corner lot too, as Janie was just saying, and we came in here 4 years ago, and your fence ordinance for corner lots is bizarro. It really is. So if you look at the outside of my fence on the side on 116th, that is mostly my property, not the swale, if you look at the lovely survey. But it looks like it's all outside my fence, because in order to have a fence 6 feet high, I had to be 7 feet back from the line. So I've got these wonderful oak trees all outside of my fence, 4 big oak trees and another tree, which then you don't know where my property. I'm just saying, this is just one example. So I don't know how a code officer or anybody else driving down the street even knows where this all starts and stops to be able to cite somebody, because this is a question, really. Do you all have like a map of, the public right-of-way that has the swales identified, or do you have to rely on the surveys from the property owners, just in the context of enforcing this whole thing?
I'd actually like to have that answered as well.
We do not have a right-of-way map, like a municipal Alice sheet that shows all properties in the right-of-ways. Okay, what I've seen here in the last few months is that the majority of the FPL poles and your water meters are pretty much are in line with the property lines.
Thank you.
Okay. I know there's water meters in backyards. Our son just bought a house here. His water meters at the end of his backyard, which I just saw the other. I was like, how's your water meter back here? But anyways, but I'm assuming that goes in most cases. But it is kind of hard to figure out just where it starts and stops. So I'll reserve other comments, because you're going to go section by section and allow more comments.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for this section?
Hi, Rox Ross, 11166 Griffin Boulevard. So first of all, I just have to comment on the agenda and the changing agendas. Between yesterday and today, we had 2 different agendas, 3 different backups, so it's hard to know what you're going to talk about and what we're supposed to comment on. But we seem to now be having a directed conversation, not whether we should or shouldn't develop in the swale, but we're going to develop in the swale, and what's the standard that we should set? To me, that jumps 3 steps before where we should be. You should know that the swales have a purpose. They help clear streets of stormwater. They provide storage capacity for excess water. They act as a filtration system to mitigate the adverse impact of pollutants common in urban stormwater runoff. And those are important functions that we should consider here in Biscayne Park before we develop more swale. One of the most important functions it has is the aesthetic value and the green space that village residents give so much value to. With any planned regulation, you should be reading your comprehensive plan, because in the comprehensive plan there are land use elements, and they include a commitment to maintain and improve natural environment that's key to village identity, the quality of life, as well as property values and tax base. And there's a conservation element to, among other things, protect South Florida's invaluable water and clean air resources. I guess that addresses section 1. I'll come back.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. We did a survey, the village did a survey. Village staff did this survey maybe 3 years ago, and it was updated in July of 2017. At that time, there were about 30 properties that either had no driveway at all, or had no parking surface at all, or had only swale parking. So we're talking about possibly 30 properties in the year and a half, 2 years since then. I'm sure that there were a lot of driveways that were put in. I see them on the code agenda every month. So how many properties are we actually trying to address with this massive rewrite of the code on driveways and swale development? I'm not sure, but we ought to take a look at it.
Thank you. I do want to make one comment regarding the last thing that Ms. Ross said.
Yes, get on top of that mic, please.
Tessa, not seeing you. Okay, we'll try.
It's working. You just have to get
Top
close
of
to it.
All right. It's not the best. Okay. So the issue for me is that, and I'll speak for myself, and that is that it's not just about what we're going to do now, but in the future. So if people want to develop the swales for a section, I do think we have to look at having a code that allows for that, as opposed to what happens now, which sometimes people just do what they want. So I think one of the issues for me is not the 30 properties, but where we go moving forward so it's consistent. That's, from my opinion, as to why we're doing this. And as far as development of the swales or not developing the swales, I don't think we can go backwards. We're an 80-year-old community with incredibly narrow streets. In my particular street, it takes, they actually pull over on the swales. They have to in order to get by in some of the streets. So we do have some circumstances that make this village very, very unique. And I think we need to address that.
MacDonald Kennedy, 11705 Northeast 11th Place. Good evening. I didn't know you were going to use this format, so I have notes that are going to be a little random now, I think. But
if you want to, Mr. Kennedy, you can just address
No,
those
I'll try to
sections.
follow your format. That's okay, because I think I can probably fit them in to whatever section you're talking about. So talking about swale parking, it's kind of odd to me to talk about parking on the swale because where I have always lived, people park in their driveway. So the notion of parking on the grass or parking on the swale, which is public property, is always strange to me anyway. And when you develop swales for parking, you're creating public parking is what you're really doing. Remember that the swales belong to Biscayne Park. So if you develop it, you're not developing parking for that property owner, you're developing a public parking space where anybody could park. And I don't think you can enforce that. I'm going to agree with what some people already said. All conversations about code have to begin and end with enforcement. Without enforcement, we have no code. Something like primary versus secondary parking, if I think I understood what Will said, that's not enforceable. You can't enforce where someone primarily parks or secondarily parks. I'm not certain if that's what you meant, though.
No, that's not what I meant.
Okay, because I think you were answering something she said, and I think maybe the swords got crossed there. But at any rate, I have the three main topics that Rox was talking about, and it really comes down to safety, water drainage, and aesthetics. So I'm going to say a couple of things about each of them very quickly. Safety is an all or nothing issue. We are a pedestrian friendly city. There are walkers and joggers and dog walkers and kids all the time all over our streets. And if you allow swale parking anywhere, then you're no matter how you try to limit it, you are in essence making it a more dangerous place for people to walk on our streets. Develop swales endanger pedestrians by forcing cars and people to share tight spaces, and as we know, speeding is always going to be an issue here. When streets are lined with cars, drivers can't see into yards, and they can't see kids running between parked cars, and pedestrians can't get out of the way. Further, cars leaving driveways are also hidden behind parked cars. Asphalt swales in particular are the most dangerous because they actually look like a wide street. I live on a street adjacent to several properties that have asphalt paved swales, and when there are cars parked there, it looks horrible. It looks like a strip mall. But when there are cars parked there, it's dangerous because the cars are actually sticking into the street. And I've sent you guys all pictures of cars that are parked there legally, but they're actually sticking into the street. So I guess that means they aren't legal. But they're sticking into the street. When the cars aren't parked there, it looks like the street is just that much wider. And on the curve on 11th Place, drive down there, drive northbound on it, and you'll see it looks like the street is twice as wide. I will be out front working in my garden, and I will witness people driving in the swale and then swerving when they realize, oh, there's a tree in front of me, and they have to get out of the way of the tree. So developed swales are dangerous in so many ways, especially at night and in the rain. I think I'll save the rest of my comments for the next section, but I do want to say that I also find it, without talking about anyone up there personally, it's kind of awkward because you're having a conversation about a topic that some of you, if I understand the current code, some of you aren't following. I think some of you park on your lawns right now, which is against the current code, so you're in violation. And some of you don't have driveways and are parking on the swale. So it's just kind of an awkward conversation to have because you're writing a code, and I know everything you do affects you because you're residents. You're not only, commissioners, but you're also residents. I know that. But this one in particular directly affects some of you guys, and it's very visible to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else for this section? Okay, we'll move on to, does anybody want to address, first of all, so we don't just move forward, does anybody want to address any of the comments that were made by the residents?
I will real quick. As I said earlier, in a perfect world in this park, we would have sidewalks for pedestrians to walk down, and the idea of developing swale may not be that much of an issue, but however, you know, we're looking, I think we have to look at swale development for some parking situations because of the layout and configurations of some of the lots that we have here. The way it is currently, there are some people, if we did not allow any type of swale development, there are people who would not have, given the way the code is written, they would not have spacing on their lot to park their vehicles, or we would be complaining that they're putting gravel over their entire front yard and using the entire front yard as a parking surface because they would need to. So, you know, it's one of those things where I think we have to have this conversation because it is a necessity. I mean, it is a fact of Biscayne Park, so we have to have this conversation. But that's why we have to have the serious conversation about how do we allow swale development while still making sure that we're keeping pedestrian safety in mind, and we want to make sure that we're having materials to allow water runoff to drain back down. You know, so we have to have those conversations about the design of swale parking. I don't think it is a situation of swale parking, no swale parking. We're going to have it, and that's just my opinion on that.
I do want to ask one thing, because you brought up a really good point. Can you look at that curve area and see if we can at least put some sort of reflectors or something that make that road edge? So we'll try and address that specific problem, because that is a safety issue. We need to address it. Commissioner Smith.
The board adjusts, the board talked about the swale. I just think that we don't need to change it there. I think we just need to enforce what we have already there. They already addressed the swale areas. And to me, to tell people that I'd rather have people park on their property. I'd rather have driveways parked on, and I'd rather keep the swales clean. But you already have people that already have swales. You can't just tell some people you can have swales, but the other people can't have it.
I don't think that's the intention here. I think.
Sounds like to me.
No, I'll speak for myself. The intention for me is to decide a criteria so that it's objective and consistent. So if moving forward, if somebody, for example, tears down a house and builds a whole new house, do we want that person to be able to put in swale parking when they clearly can arrange for parking on their property? To me, the answer is no. Okay? The other issue that I think is really interesting is everybody's perspective, and some of you have very unique perspectives based upon the street you live on. From my perspective, having swale development is safer than having no swale development, because our street that I live on is about 15 or 16 feet wide. So the idea of having a flat surface that somebody can get out of the way on, as long as it's far enough back, which is I think what the manager said, the public works manager said, is that if you have that 3-foot setback, you'll be able to get off. Also, in some of the instances where people need to pull over, if you have two cars passing by, having that extra driveway to pull over in is better than crawling up on somebody's lawn. So I think in some instances it's safer. In some instances, I think you're correct. In some instances, it may not be as crucial. But I can tell you from the cost of having just developed one, I don't think anybody's going to develop a swale unless they have a need, because the cost to do so is quite high. So I don't think people are going to run up and do that just because they can. Everybody knows the cost of doing driveways is very high.
Then why do we need to address it? By your logic, people are not going to do it unless they...
Because if you're going to do it, you still have to have a criteria, because what we have happening now is some people just rock up all the way around their whole house, another person will rock up the front. I think you have to have some guidelines, and I don't think that's a bad thing. That doesn't mean restrictive till we don't have them. I don't concur that we shouldn't have any swale parking. I absolutely don't agree with that. I read several things on... I agree with Ms. Ross regarding the what an intent of a true swale is in an FDOT sense, but we don't have true swales here, and I'm going to ask Mr. Hernandez on this. We don't have true swales like you'd find in a city or an FDOT setting. These are not what you would call swales that are drainage specific. Okay, so
it's very difficult to see what we have out there. Again, But I want to make a comment on what the commissioner said. You mentioned enforcement, correct? And I want to be clear on this. If we start enforcing the actual swale area, I'm telling you right now that there's going to be a lot of mowing and a lot of cutting trees. Okay, a lot of mowing and a lot of cutting trees, and I don't think this is what the village wants. That's just my opinion, because I am letting you know that if we start forcing enforcement, Public Works is going to have a lot of work. I'm going to ask for at least 20 more people to start cutting trees for my budget. That's for sure.
And let me ask you something, a follow-up question on that, sir. Of the sightline issues we have here, how many do you say of the percentage that we talked about would you say right now that we have issues with? And then how many of those are really safety issues? So the safety issues are small, but the sightline issues, if I'm not mistaken, were
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And that's why I also think about the parking on the swale is that some of these vehicles are getting bigger, and you're going to have more safety issues. You know, in other words, more sight problem vision. So you could develop a parking in the swale, 3 feet. You're going to have maybe a criteria. You're going to go back 40 feet from the stop sign, but in some cases you're not going to be able to fit that criteria. You're going to get closer to the corner, and somebody decides to park a big truck. That's going to be another issue. So,
you've had those, because I know...
And definitely we do have those.
And Officer Concern, I know you addressed a couple of those. So... Chief.
No, what?
Okay.
So, again, when you mention enforcing, there's a thin line there.
So
there's one question. Okay, so my understanding is that as it stands, your primary parking service, your driveway, has to be on your property.
Do you agree with that? Okay, so
Right.
now we agree. One,
Okay.
2, 3. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay, so we
Okay.
have a consensus on that.
So at that point, then we're looking at swales. Swale parking there is additionally either optional or really necessary because you don't have room for a driveway on your property.
Like an alternate.
So it's an alternate. So primary is driveway, secondary would be swale. We all sort of agree on that.
I think
guess,
we all
then,
agree on
so.
that, yes.
Okay. And so from that perspective then, the swale is now an option rather than mandatory. Some people will develop, some people have developed, and so forth. Is it a matter of, let me see how to say this, is it a matter of, it's no longer a matter of necessity, or if it is a matter of necessity, who determines that? Is that administrative
Yeah.
variance? Okay.
That's what I think we just agreed to previously. We agree on the administrative variance? So that if we're going to do this, it goes through an administrative process.
Okay, good.
To do that's where we had it where we left off.
For newly developed.
For newly developed.
For newly
swales.
developed
Yeah.
swales.
Or
Okay.
50% deteriorated and therefore has to be addressed.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
I know it's probably later on. Just a question. We are going to talk about maintenance, right?
Yes, definitely. That's coming up.
Save my comments for that.
Okay. The next thing we have is the design specification. This is where I think the question is, what is that design specification? What do we want to see or not? What is written here is what the previous commission had agreed to at that time. When we had last done it, that is what is written here as a commission. It's not one person sitting up here that was implied. So that is what is here. For example, size of swale parking surface, up to 40% of the swale areas in the right-of-way may be developed for parking. That was not something that I did. That was something I wanted space and size. I wanted it very well defined. I wanted to define a parking space as a parking space. My colleagues did not concur with me on that at the time, and so this was the language I believe that was come up with when I talked to Mr. Hartung. This was come up, I believe, and Gary, can you correct me on that? That was done in the meetings, correct? The 40%? Okay, so what you were saying, and I just want to be clear on this, so it was 40% of impervious, period, and so that if it was pervious, you could have the whole thing done, correct? And that's what was agreed upon. Okay. And that's not what was relayed to me when I met, it was 40% period. So it's 40% impervious only, and therefore you could have rock all the way around if you wanted to or whatever, and park wherever you want to. Okay. All right. I'm going to allow the, before I comment, I'm going to allow the Public Works Manager to comment on that and have what he would suggest. You're the expert, so we're going to punt all things to you.
I agree with Ross, what she said. The key is to try to keep as much, pervious area and drainage. Again, aesthetically, turf block works. These things work, but I don't have a preference, to be honest with you. I think whatever design works and whatever people want. But I really believe that the cut stone, the turf block, brick pavers, set in sand,
Is there anything there that's what you would consider impervious?
concrete.
Okay.
It should be impervious concrete, which is allowed today.
There is pervious
Yeah, I'm sorry.
concrete now.
Right, there is.
Yeah, so
Right, but
if
that-
you're
but it should say
considering
pervious
this,
concrete.
we should consider the pervious concrete when you're talking about developing the 40%. So if it's pervious, are we saying concrete around the entire swale? So we got to be careful.
And to that end, should we use pervious pavers there as well?
Pervious
Yeah.
concrete and pervious pavers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next option's brick. That
haven't
would
seen
be
the brick.
sandset.
Yeah,
but-
sandset.
So it's sandset. So
Sandset.
brick
But that's
sandset.
sandset brick. I mean, that's going to be somewhat pervious, but not nearly as pervious as
Correct.
lawn or something like that. So
This is
Interlocking.
Yeah, the only interlocking. The only
Interlocking on sandset.
The only question I have, and this is where it gets kind of aesthetic issues, is we have to be careful that whatever we're putting in one and the other, if they're going to put in both at the same time, it matches. Unless
Aesthetically. Yeah.
I know there's an exception. So for example, if I have an asphalt driveway, which is permitted now, and if we agree, which we have not yet, that we would not have asphalt, then we'd have to have something else that's pervious. At least, so in other words, maintaining the pervious nature of this. First of all, let's do the big picture rather than the details. Does everybody agree we should maintain pervious materials in the swale? Yes?
Yes.
Yes? Yes, okay. So from there, we also have to go back and then look at the situations of people that are either putting in something new,
Correct.
okay, making it match whenever possible if it's already pervious as a driveway, okay? And then the other issue would be, do we want to limit it by size to 40%? And I'm going to defer to you on that one. Do you want to limit it by size? There was a conversation that it was never intended to limit by size and that you could do whatever pervious for a surface, or do we want to not do that? That's why I'm going to leave this to you. There's two thoughts, and I look at this, I'm going to just tell you, I've looked at, I don't know how many properties, and I went back and forth 100 times, and every property was a little bit different. There are some properties that are completely shaded, and sod's never going to grow there, okay? Then there's properties that are completely sunny, and sod will grow beautifully there. So these are situations that I don't have an expertise on what would be the best thing for us to do in the village. I do think there is some flexibility needed depending on the circumstance that is there. But the defining of the parking surface can be defined. I think Mrs. Kuhl's point was that was never the intention, that if you wanted to park anywhere you needed to park, you could park it and make that dropped, correct? And also your point was that you could also park on grass, correct?
On the swale.
Do you mind coming up just because I want to make sure, and I apologize, but I just want to make sure I address everything that you were talking about.
They didn't restrict parking on the grass on the swale, or they didn't treat it the same way as parking in your yard. But the thing with parking on your swale on grass, if you do it continually, you're going to kill it, and then you'll get a citation. You're going to have to do something else. On your lawn, it was never acceptable on private property.
Thank you. Just want to make sure, and everybody could hear you. Thank you.
I would like to. There are a lot of more materials out there today. and I would like to take a little bit more time to see what are the latest updates on Miami-Dade, what have they allowed, and other cities, what they have allowed. So I would like to take a little bit, because I know that pervious concrete is, pervious concrete is changing, and I know the turf block has been changing. So.
And the other possibility is we could have the language in such a way that it allows for future materials. There's different ways we can handle that, or we can be very specific and then have to change things later, or we can add a line that says "or upon addition by the administration," so that there is a way to get other materials put in, so that as future moves forward and as we come with better materials, we can allow those back in.
I think it's, unlike other cities, we do not have storm drainage here. We rely on our swales for that. So I think ultimately we need to move towards as much pervious material on swales as possible.
So is there an agreement to just move forward with having staff come back and tell us what their recommendations are on that? Okay. And then we'll have to deal with the issue of how to aesthetically deal with the issue of one being one and one being another, if that has to be a necessity, because we don't allow something that's impervious. For example, we're not going to allow asphalt for that reason because it's impervious.
Correct.
So if somebody has an asphalt driveway now that's in perfect condition and then they want to add a swale parking, it's going to have to be a complementary material rather than asphalt, because it won't be permitted. And I think that's where P&Z or some other process in play that deals with that issue.
Correct. There was a property here recently on 115th, where obviously P&Z said, hey, they had asphalt on the swale, so we ended up doing is putting in the new driveway approach, and then they removed the existing swale, and they came back and resawed it. And I think that's perfect. Removing the asphalt, having asphalt on the swale that's not a good idea.
And I think Mr. Kennedy also articulated why that's not a good idea. Okay. Any other comments on that portion? Okay. What about up to 40% swale right away be developed? There was conversation that we should allow full development of the swale, or do we want to restrict the parking to 40%? My concern is sightlines, safety off street. That's really my two biggest ones. And also, I don't disagree that green space is a better alternative to paving when possible. So I don't mind the idea of this. The only thing I would caution is if you have an area that's shaded, you're going to have to allow people to do things that is aesthetically pleasing, whether you limit the parking portion of that or not. Because at the end of the day, if you can't grow sod, you can't grow sod. And as climate change continues to go up, sod is going to be harder and harder to deal with water. So we're going to have to come up with some flexibility anyway in the future, in my opinion. But I am for as I could either do as it is written now, or we could actually define a space by size. So for example, you say a 14 by 20, 14-foot back, that leaves 3 feet to 4 feet for safety and allows you the distance of the cars. You can do it a couple of different ways. Any thoughts?
40% is what it says here.
I'm fine with 40%. Leave it to the homeowner if they want to do 20, they can do 20.
Just leave it 40%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I think Mr. Coolpike can address this. I think originally it was for visitor parking on the swell. It was, I think, a minimum of 8 foot wide, 20 foot long. Yeah.
No, was it? Yeah.
And that whole section really never came to the commission. It was left in the workshop. The whole landscape is made, but you never figured out that we couldn't come to consensus. So that's why it never went forward.
That was supposed to be a separate element. It was one person's idea of having this visitor parking, and there was no agreement on it whatsoever.
Okay. So,
Mayor, I'd like to recommend that we do stay with the percentage, simply because the sizes and widths of these lots vary so greatly that a percentage is going to be, I think, more applicable and safer if we're doing this as a blanket, as opposed to,
I'm okay.
one or two
I
or
gave
three
it up
parking
last time, I
spaces.
just thought I'd bring it up again, hope somebody would pick it up, but no, okay. The reason I say that is if you do 40% for some people, they get a parking space and a half, and it's paid for no reason because it really doesn't serve any purpose. And so for me, it was an issue of having more than you needed. But that, at the same time, cost will determine that for some folks anyway. So I'll withdraw my objection to 40%. So 40% it is. The next portion was, if a parcel has a front yard and corner side yard, and this was done in the previous commission, if the parcel has a front yard and a corner side yard, as my house does, off-street parking spaces, which means private parking spaces, may be either in the front yard or, I'm sorry, it shouldn't say off-street parking spaces, it should say swale parking spaces. Sorry, that's a typo. Swale parking spaces may be on either the front yard or corner side yard, but not both. And the idea is that you wouldn't be able to develop two different spots and two different sections for that same exact reason of maintaining green space and drainage. So if there's no objection to that for corner lots? Okay, so that's consensus on that one.
Yeah.
I think we already went over
It's
C.
an interesting one.
Well, I will tell you, because the only one I had questions about was duplexes. Because I know one duplex that's on a corner lot, and if you want to have, depending on where the frontage for the door is, they may want to do that. But I don't see that as a huge issue. It can be also taken up in administrative variance if it needs to be. Personally. So is there any thoughts on that?
No.
No objection? Commissioner Smary? No. Okay. All right, so the permitted materials we've already kind of addressed, and I think Public Works Manager, Mr. Hernandez, will come back with us for that one. D was materials in relation to existing driveway design. That was what we had previously just talked about with the idea of complementary materials. Is there any objection? I don't see where we'd have an objection, but is there anything that seems controversial in that? The idea is that if you have a material that's currently a driveway and you can't use it because it's impervious, then therefore you'd have to have a complementary type material that would be determined by either P&Z or somebody. Any objection with that? With that, we have one. We're going to actually the next one is very quick, so if you all don't mind, I'm just going to skip through that, and then we'll have to take public comments. Is maintenance of parking surfaces. The criteria for allowable repairs was less than a 50% deterioration, and the criteria for replacement of parking surfaces and/or aprons was more than 50%. I'm going to ask Officer Caserta, because I know you had an opinion on this, if you'd like to talk about that before we continue.
I think that the community needs to consider the fact that do we want to wait for the driveways to become 50% in deterioration before we start enforcing any type of repairs. I think we should really think about that, because you're talking about half of a driveway could be divoted and pavers could be missing. You're just talking about a whole shebang. Chunks of concrete can be missing. So what do we want to do with that?
Do you want to suggest something?
I would suggest probably 25%. And we're not talking about full replacement, but we're talking about repairs.
So before you notify a homeowner that they have to repair it, basically at the 25% is the trigger to send out the notice. Is that correct?
That's what I would recommend, but again, that's up to the commission, what their thoughts are.
And then, but the criteria for replacing the parking surface is 50 or no? Did you want to change that to 25?
I don't have a preference in that. That's, again, up to you guys. That's just my recommendation.
I like the idea of the 25 and 50, because what that does is it gives you a range to get somebody to repair something that's damaged, but at the same time, it doesn't cost a homeowner if they have a possibility. But see, then you have that leeway between 26 and 50. What do you do? I don't know. Any thoughts? Anybody else? How about we open up to the public, and we'll come back to it.
I'm just being a lawyer about the word replacement. Does replacement mean replacing it with what is already there? Like, let's say you have a 50% deteriorated Chicago brick driveway. You bought the house. You don't have enough money to put in an entirely new Chicago brick driveway. You want to tear it all out and put in gravel with appropriate barriers. does the word replacement confine the homeowner to putting in exactly what was there before? Could we not look for a word that is a little more flexible, like renewal of parking surface, or something along those lines that doesn't infer restoring it to the previous standard or to the same material that already exists?
I have no problem with that. As a matter of fact, I think that's great.
Okay.
Just one more thing. I think also with respect to the maintenance of the parking surfaces, I think that we should also consider if we're going to do minor things like gravel topping off, or possibly doing some, somewhat of a professional patchwork on asphalt driveways or whatnot, then we're not going to require all of these people to come in for permits just for simple things like that,
No.
unless they're restructuring the surface or making it larger, reducing it.
I don't see why we would do that. I think it's just notice of repair like all other repairs we've always done historically in the village. We've never required that.
Yeah, we have.
We have?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Sorry.
Yep.
Do we all agree that we don't need a permit to do a repair, just a notification and a repair?
Don't need a
Permit for that.
because it's up to us, I mean, most property owners, the majority of property owners are going to want to take care of their property. And if they-
Actually, let's come
15%.
back. Let's come back to that for a minute. This is not the driveway. This is the swale. I'm seeing some motion over here, so I'm going to go ahead and defer this to Mr. Hernandez.
No. I was just, I was just thinking that, should we repair it to an existing condition? I think that that's the word that we should be using, because when something starts, what happens is when it starts to break and pieces start to fall off, and then you're going to get into this debate of, do I fix it or do I put a brand new one? If you're going to put a brand new one, you're going to have to pull a permit. So I would say that repair to its existing condition and
Right,
leave it.
But for replacement,
But then if you're going to replace it, then you're going to remove, and you're going to put something brand new in.
right, but you could put in something brand new that's less expensive and more suitable to.
Correct.
That's
But
what I was saying.
if that would happen, they would have to pull a permit, because you are removing.
Oh, okay, yeah, no,
Right.
that's a separate
That's
issue.
why I wanted
I
to.
was
Can
talking
I
about
get-
materials, you're talking
Yeah,
about.
can I have a
brand new.
third
Okay.
scenario?
Go ahead.
Which is I have a 50% deteriorated brick driveway.
Correct.
And the gentleman came out and said, I can repair it, okay, but we're going to say, no, you have to pull that all up and start again. So there could be some situations whereby it can be fixed, but I don't know. I'll pull that back. This is too many hypotheticals. We have to have something where it draws a line, so I'm going to withdraw that. So how do you guys, the situation is, do you want to split the difference? What I don't want to do is have a homeowner decide that it's not deteriorated enough and give them a cost of anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 to fix a driveway. So I think we have to be careful on the maintenance parking surface. Does staff want to come back and tell us what is done in other places? And that way we can be more objective about it rather than us sitting here on the dais coming up with that?
I think so.
You can do that, yeah.
Because I would rather have somebody knowledgeable come up with that number, not us. Is that okay?
I rather.
Okay. All right.
I'd rather do that.
So if there's no objection from my colleagues, can we ask staff to come back with how to deal with number C better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Open public comments for both B and C.
Okay, Gary Kuhl again.
Can I ask something, please? In the future, ma'am, I know you didn't do it intentionally, but please don't cut me off when I'm making a comment.
Did I? I'm so sorry if I did. My apologies, sir. Thank you.
Okay, just a point of information. We have swales that vary from around 6 feet to 30 feet wide. David, to your relief, swale maintenance is the responsibility of the homeowner.
Yeah, I know.
So, okay, well, you said you need extra guys to maintain the swales.
No, I said, I'm sorry, but I want to clear what I said. I said if we had to start enforcing.
No, it's the code officer writing a notice of violation. The homeowner is to maintain the swale. So it's not your responsibility. It has nothing to do with Public Works. Okay. I
In the
agree.
event, though, the homeowner doesn't cut it, then Public Works would have to go in and take care of it. So
And
I think that's
true
what
of
he's
the entire
referring
property.
to.
Okay, but the point is that we have people that are allowing their swales to be abused, run down. There is no grass, there is no ground cover. That is the intent, is for them to maintain it. It isn't lawn mowing. And that's not a widespread problem anyway. I agree with the mayor on the lot widths. You have lots that are 75 feet wide, you have lots that are 175 feet wide, perhaps even wider. So you say 40%, it's immediately a huge inequity. If you have a 75-foot lot, you can barely get one more space in, where somebody else can get 3 or 4 possibly.
Well, no, I have one of the bigger lot size too. I'm just going to argue you have 2 spaces.
Okay.
Unless you allow development of the both corners, which we would be working.
No, no,
and
and
then
I
it would be 4.
absolutely agree with that. No, it should all be in front. As far as, when you say 25% deterioration on a driveway, you're rolling back our current ordinance. You are requiring a current ordinance to maintain your driveway. Go out and look at what a 25% deterioration in a driveway looks like. I don't think you even want to go there. I don't think we should ever get to that point. Okay, and 50% is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, to me, it's more like 10% is where you should start. There is pervious asphalt, and pavers are not necessarily pervious. Hollywood does not consider pavers pervious. There is runoff from pavers. It's a common misconception. And when you say pervious, what's the criteria? 50%, 10%, 75%? It's going to take a little thought to come up with that. And you need to have that criteria. And there is information, and in fact, the City of Miami has something, and I can't read it. It's not their Public Works manual. I'll have to dig it out. I'll give it to David. Administrative variances. And this is no comment on anybody here, no insinuating anything. But administrative variances are an open door. It's the pathway to corruption, selective enforcement. I mean, it's just not the way to go. You need rules. There are always exceptions. But to kindly say, well, we'll just say, we'll decide, somebody is going to decide sometime in the future whether you should put a driveway in or you don't need a driveway or what you should do with your swale. You need rules.
So you want criteria? I just want to ask, you want criteria? I just want to be specific. You want criteria for that administrative variance?
Yes, I think it's pretty simple to do that. Mm-hmm. It may take a little work, but you're simply just kicking the can down the road. You're not solving a problem, you're creating one. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to make one comment. You're absolutely right, Gary. That's why I asked to defer on this, so we can look into more, pavers and bricks and turf block, and there's more. So that's why I asked to defer that, so I could get more information. And I agree with you. We just need more information on the permeable materials.
Barbara Kuehl, 111th Street. I'm just going to repeat something that Gary was talking about the 25 or 50% deterioration. That was a criteria in the code when something needed to be completely redone, like a fence. If it was more than 50%, then the entire fence. It was never. No community is going to wait until something gets 50% deteriorated or 25%, like a swale or a driveway, before a code officer is going to say, you need to maintain this. Our code says our properties need to be well maintained, and that's what, in our code right now, the swale must be well maintained. So once the maintenance goes down and things start chipping, you can ask the homeowner to please resurface it or do something. As far as the swale, just commenting on what David had said about the swale, right now we're allowed to plant in the code right now, we are allowed to plant in our swale. We're allowed to have trees. You have to have clear trunk between 3 feet and 6 feet. You're allowed to have shrubs, but you need a 3 foot in the visibility zone, 3 feet and 6 feet. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara, can I ask you one question, if I may, just to make sure I understand what you're saying? For the criteria for allowable repairs, is what you're suggesting we just leave that as discretionary to something run down like we would in our normal language, and then the replacement would stay at 50? Is that what you're asking?
In
In other words, there's two issues. One is repair, which we can ask people to do all the way through, not have a percentage, but have basically a property maintenance. If it's deteriorated, that's up to the code enforcement officer. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Think of it this way. We have a code that our houses have to be well maintained. The paint must be well maintained. So the code officer has to make a decision. One wall is badly stained because the rust is getting there from the sprinkler. It's a normal thing for them to give them a notice, please get rid of the rust. It doesn't mean you have to repaint your entire house. That's just property maintenance. If all the paint was flaking off, then maybe you would say your whole house has to be painted. But the same thing with the driveway. Little areas might have gotten damaged or whatever. Just keep it maintained.
Thank you very much.
Just to speak on that, I mean, my understanding of the intent of that language was simply just that. If code comes by and your driveway has some cracks or area has rutted out, code can come by and say, hey, your driveway is not well maintained. You need to take care of it. For the homeowner, I can say, well, it's less than 50%. I'm going to go ahead and repair it. Or if I say it's less than 50%, and the code officer says more than half your driveway is crumbling apart, well, then you've got to go ahead and replace the entire driveway. So, yeah, I don't think it was anything. I still think code has to be out there, even if it's a small deterioration in the driveway or swale parking area. You know, the homeowner is responsible for that. It has to be notified, but that 50% is just for them, for that homeowner to know that's that threshold.
Don't let it get past that.
Yeah, if you get past 50, you're going to have to tear the whole thing out.
Okay.
So
and
take care of it.
And they're going to come
before.
back with us to something more objective than the number
Yeah.
we came up with. Okay. Please, I'm sorry.
David Raymond. I agree with the last two speakers in terms of the maintenance issue versus a percentage and all this, because first of all, just like I asked about the swales before, where are the swales? Who's measuring these percentages and what are you basing that on? Is somebody going to have a property survey and say, here's your driveway, it's this big, this much is in the swale, this much is on your property, here's how much has to be fixed? I think it's just going to be, you know, it's hard enough, as other people have said tonight, it's hard enough to enforce the codes we have without putting in something there that you're going to have to measure. The other thing is, I know you're going to come back on the materials and such, but it's very prescriptive when you read what's there now. And if you go back and you look at other municipalities and you say, okay, right now, it's like now everybody's doing pavers. Years ago, or they're doing these big portions of concrete with little strips in between. Some people put rocks in, some people put grass in, some people put artificial grass in. I don't know, whatever floats your boat on all that stuff. But I think that if you have things that you don't want, that might be easier to define than the things you do, because next week there's going to be a new trend in driveways and everybody's going to want to do this new trend. And as Gary says, then they're going to come back and say, hey, Coral Gables, everybody's now using crushed puka shells for our driveways and we want to use that. I mean, look at the trends. Look around. You know, it's the same thing. It's like everybody's painting their house gray. Years ago, maybe it was green. I mean, it happens. So maybe it's easier to define. You know, you don't want asphalt. You don't want things that are not going to be pervious surfaces. Maybe you just have that as an overriding issue and leave the details, you know, to be. But thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Barbara Watts, 720 Northeast 118th Street. Okay, is that working? Okay, Barbara Watts, 720 Northeast 118th Street. And I'm not sure, when trying to look at the, you know, the code as it is going through this, which all of the, if we've come to all the things that I'd like to mention, but just a couple of things. From what we've been discussing, it seems as though, yes, we do not have a cookie-cutter neighborhood. Every block is different. Every street is different. So I think it's very difficult, and I know we need rules, and we need some sort of a code, but I think it has to be flexible enough to accommodate all of these different individual things. It's not, your block is different from my block. You know, a block that is a cul-de-sac block doesn't have the traffic issues that other blocks do. So even the sightline issues are completely completely different. So to enforce, to apply certain rules to every single block, when like a block without a swale is a block without a median as opposed to a block with a median that people can get off. I mean, I think there needs to be flexibility, and and with some of the rules in this code, I think that they're unnecessary, and that if code could see that there is a slight line difference or a slight line problem, that could be addressed for specific houses. Because if you go through, as Mr. Hernandez said about pulling up trees and such like that, if you look at the code now where it says the first 5 feet of the swale has to be only grass or something very low, and then you go to the next so many feet and all, people are going to have to destroy their landscaping. Just drive down 9th Avenue from Griffin and go over there. You'll see beautiful landscaping with fire bushes and all. I just did. And half of the houses in Biscayne Park will be found against code. And I think that it's not, and yes, we want to have safety, but I think that it doesn't necessarily have to follow the draconian rules that are in this code. So I think that there should be something like administrative, not variances, but taking into account the exigencies and the particularities of each particular house. I do think that there are some houses that, for instance, the house just over here where Ryan lives, I can't remember the last name. Okay, their house really doesn't have a driveway, so they just bricked up, the former owner bricked up in an ugly way the whole front yard, so they're parking right in front of the living room and bedrooms, and it would have been visually much better to have a parallel parking on the swale. So I think that we have to be careful about what we're asking to do. We want the lush landscaping, and I don't think in all cases it's necessarily an issue of danger. Also, then you have to take into account the type of driveway that each person has. Now, for instance, okay, here's my case. Well, I've got a circle driveway that was added in. Well, in fact, if you look at the openings at both sides of the approach to my driveway, it's an asphalt driveway going all the way around. Actually, that takes up more than 40% of my swale. And so the 40% rule just doesn't necessarily work. So I just think that you might have to keep make some rules, but have them so that their variances are allowed depending on the particularities of the property. Okay, thank you. And I know this is a difficult thing because I was on the commission with this before, and I disagreed with 3/4 of what was in the code. But anyway, thank you for this and taking attention to it.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Rox Ross, 11166 Griffin Boulevard. Just to touch on some of the things that other people have said, the 40% rule is important. It may not fit every single circumstance. It may not fit the exception, but you have to have some standard that is set. And whether you're putting in a parking surface on private property or you're going to be allowed to develop the swale according to the specifications that will be set forth here, I think that a survey should be required of either of those developments, because that's the only way you're going to be able to determine property lines for one thing and what the 40% actually is. With regard to the 50% rule, I thought it was a little weird for our code officer to say, is the community going to not enforce the code until it's 50% deteriorated? Other people have talked about it. Absolutely, maintenance issue. You don't have to wait till it's 50% deteriorated to give someone a warning or a courtesy notice. The 50% rule is definitely the limit, so that you would have to bring it up to code, up to the current code. One more thing on the materials. And I live across the street from a huge parking lot of pavers. If you come by in a rainstorm, that parking lot of pavers creates a stream on Griffin Boulevard from all the runoff. So I don't know how those pavers were set. It looked like they were doing them in sand, but that definitely is not that definitely is impervious, and all of the runoff goes into the swale and onto Griffin Boulevard.
May I ask you a question? Do you know whether or not they angled it properly? Do you have any idea? Or is it angled out to the street?
Visually looks sloped towards the street.
Yeah, that's the problem. Okay, thank you.
I just realized how that...
So let's be careful about those surfaces, the pavers, and It was suggested that maybe we say the things that we do not want to allow as materials, but that kind of goes against our entire code, which is an inclusive code, and our attorneys has told us for years and years and years, if it's not written into the code, then it is disallowed, because the opposite of that is you couldn't possibly imagine all the things that you were required to disallow, and then they would be allowed. So we have to select what are the materials that we're going to approve and try to do it to the standards of today or future development, but not go in the inverse. Thanks.
Thank you. I do want to just one thing that was said.
I'm sorry, one more comment?
Yeah.
Is in the manager's report last Friday said the administration or someone met with engineering firm Pannoni to discuss septic tank sewers as recommended by Senator Pizzo. So to me, that means we're getting into a conversation about sewers, and those things are utilities that are going to be installed in the swale and the right-of-way. So consider we're inviting people to develop a right-of-way for a parking surface that may have to come out.
Thank you. Can we comment? If you don't object, I just want to make one comment quickly. The sloping towards the street is an important one. I think one of the things that we are doing a better job now of doing is ensuring that any parking spot that is developed on the swale, or for that matter on the driveway where everything has to point inland. I don't think we always did that as well, but I know the new building person who we have is making sure of that, so that at least it's sloped appropriately, so that we don't have those issues as we were before, because I know there's a couple areas in the park where people were allowed, and it does the same thing at Puddles. I know there's one around the curve over here that has that same situation. Mr. Kennedy?
Okay, I'm a little, I have a bunch of stuff I want to say, and I think some of it pertains to this past topic, but if you want me to hold some of it till later, I can. If I start saying something you don't want me to say, I'll stop.
You just hold off the landscape.
A couple of random things. I'm a little confused what we're talking about now. Okay, so first of all, the percentage thing, you got to think all the ways it can go wrong. So when you're thinking about these things, you have to think, okay, if this is the topic, how bad could that be? I can think of one drive. I walk a lot. There's one driveway in particular that probably has, I'm going to guess, it's 3% damage to this driveway, but the damage is a gigantic hole right at the edge of the street. So this percentage thing doesn't make sense to me. Maintenance is maintenance, and replacing is another thing altogether. Please don't allow any multiple materials. We have so many driveways being done that have 2, 3, 4, 5 different materials in them. It's horrible looking. Aesthetics are important. And, part of owning a home is maintaining it and meeting the community standards. And I hate to sound like a hard ass about that stuff, but, come on, you gotta elevate. So these multiple materials are terrible. Here's another thing about gravel and swales. You have people putting gravel in swales and saying, oh no, that's not parking space, that's landscaping. Okay? So you can say anything you want to about how much you can do on a swale, and I can order 5 tons of gravel. That's probably not even that much. I should know, I just bought many tons of it. But you can dump it all over your swale and say, that's landscaping. Oh, I parked on it just for a minute. There's one place here in the village, there's one property that has a broken down car sitting on their gravel swale. It's not a parking space. They went to P&Z and tried to get approved for parking, and they were told no, so they just graveled the entire thing all around a corner property and said it's not parking, it's landscaping. Take that into consideration. Things can go more wrong than you think they can. Okay, this renewal concept, or Betsy, I'm not sure, is that the word you used instead of replacement? I think it was renewal. That would invite patches of all different kinds of material, if I understood what you said.
No, that wasn't what I meant.
Okay.
If the standard is that you have to put in a new driveway, to say you have to put in a new driveway and replace something infers that you are putting in a new driveway that matches the old one.
Oh.
As opposed to, you need a new driveway do it according to whatever materials.
Is allowed now?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you were talking about making repairs at a certain percentage or
No.
something. Okay, because we would end up with horrible patches. Okay, now regarding aesthetics overall, I do have something I want to read that I wrote, and I'll do it quickly. I know I'm running out of time. Aesthetics are important in every community, but particularly so in Biscayne Park, which actually has an aesthetic worth saving. The look and feel of Biscayne Park are unique and charming and unmistakably green. And that's in peril from Swale development. Our green tree-lined streets are being turned into strip mall parking lots, one property at a time, at an alarming rate with each new driveway. Unfortunately, aesthetics does need to be mandated, or we would need many of the codes we always have. Always think, how poorly could this code be followed properly? How poorly could this end up? And those people could say, I followed the code. So that's what you have to always remember. Don't go by what you think will happen or what you think people will do, or always try to do the right thing. That's just not reality. Regarding pervious or impervious, it doesn't really matter when you're considering aesthetics. And aesthetics, please, need to be paramount. Safety first and then aesthetics. The 40% rule doesn't matter when you're losing green spaces. So when you say a certain percentage has to be, impervious, and then there could be more gravel or whatever it ends up being, lost green space is lost green space, and it doesn't matter what the material is, and it doesn't matter if it's pervious or impervious. As we lose swales, they're gone, and they're basically gone for good. Very few people are ever contributing a swale back to the community. I'm one of them. Dan and I did our driveway, and we gave back a huge chunk of swale to Biscayne Park. You're welcome. And we made it all green the way it should be. I know the Camaras did it before they left the village as well. But it's always going to go in the opposite. It's primarily going to move in the opposite direction.
Thank you.
You're going to lose swales at a much faster rate than you'll ever get one back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
While I can appreciate not wanting someone to be forced, if they're in a position where they have to replace their driveway, to replace it with the same item, there could be any number of reasons they don't want to replace it with the same item. It's not the word replacement that's the problem. All you have to do is keep that word, because renewal, I would think like Mac did. Keep the word replacement, reference the paragraph that has all the allowable materials. Then it's clear. You don't have to replace exactly.
Just to be
what you
clear,
have.
we're not doing legal language here tonight. We're getting concept in, and it's somebody else will be doing the legal language. Okay.
And my other concern is the 40%. Sounds good until you start to think of those of us that have more than one frontage. There's a big difference between 40% of 75-foot frontage and 40% of 135-foot frontage. You really need to consider a length maximum, because as Max says so often, and I couldn't agree more, you got to think of what the worst possible interpretation could be. And think about, most of you know where I live, think about if I decided to do 40% of my side frontage, how bad that would look.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, there's one thing I wanted to add that was not in here. It's not on the agenda, but I wanted to bring it up as a topic. And I know we had discussed it in the previous commission. I also think we need to look at when people are expanding homes and building out homes, I do think before those plans are approved, there has to be adequate parking that is on private property. And so I would like to see, I know we had some language in there, but I'd like us to consider that we support that or not support that. And then I'll allow people to come up and talk about that specifically.
But that's in the driveway ordinance.
What's in the drive? My apologies. You're right. Scratch that. My apologies. Okay, so we're now on to parking regulations B. Unless there's any further comments from commissioners. Okay. Swale, we are running a little on time, so I'm going to try and get through this. We'll see whether or not we can get the landscaping. Swale parking regulations, components. All vehicles parked on the swale shall meet clear vision requirements per code, and violation will be determined by the village manager or designee. The reason there's a designee there is for obvious reasons, such as our public works manager has the expertise to figure out what those are. But I would like the public works manager to discuss that one item, because I think when I had a conversation with you about this, you said to me that if we hit this strictly, we'd probably get 60% of the village would be in violation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So having said that, I think the intent here is safety, correct?
Correct.
And so, and I'll use my favorite corner to deal with this, and that's 119th. Actually, on 6th Avenue, anywhere from 119th to 115th, there are issues with sightline issues, and I know that the code officer was kind enough to get that addressed and get some of at least the one side done, and is working on the other. So I think whenever there's safety issues, I do think that is paramount, and we should allow that to the discretion of the village manager or designee to do that. I think that's the intent of that one. Does anybody have an objection to 1? Nope. Okay. 2, storage of vehicles on the swale is not permitted. I'll let the code officer talk about that. And I think you already have something in there about tarps anyway, which would take care of, I hope, some of that. But the idea is that you can't just store a vehicle indefinitely that's not being utilized or is not licensed. And I think we already kind of have that in the code anyway, correct? Or not really?
When you put storage of vehicles, you're talking about just indefinitely keeping a vehicle there? Because I was looking at that wondering, okay. Yeah, I mean, for the majority of the thought process, I think, then what you're talking about here is basically an inoperable vehicle. So that would go whether it's on private property, swale, doesn't matter.
I wasn't sure if the code addressed that or not. And
Yeah, we would address it more as an inoperable vehicle.
Okay, so we don't need this actually because it's already there?
No, you really
Okay,
don't.
so cross out 2? Everybody okay with that?
I think we're more concerned with like trucks and whatnot blocking people's visibility.
Okay. So that would be number
2.
5, correct? The commercial vehicle shall only be allowed to park temporarily in the swale abutting the property owner. If we can, yeah, okay, just want to be all on the same page. So what you were talking about is number 5, is that correctly worded?
Yes.
To address your issues that you had mentioned? I think the only thing I would add against no commercial vehicles should be allowed to park on the swale overnight unless obtaining a police permit, which is what we have now anyway.
Like
if somebody has a U-Haul and they're coming in, they're getting ready to move, I'd like to have them the opportunity.
I mean, but do we want to, what about the individual who works at night and sleeps during the day? You're going to have that commercial vehicle during the day, so I think you want to think a little bit deeper into this. Do we want to allow large trucks parked on the swale on the weekends, or during the week, or during the day?
Excuse me. I'm
really-
asking everybody to be respectful, that everybody's going to listen to everybody respectfully. We may have different perspectives, but listen to both perspectives, please. So and you'll have a chance to come up and comment. I don't have an objection to the fact that if somebody's working during the day, I don't personally like box trucks, period, in the park. I don't mind other stuff, but I don't like box trucks in the park. That's just me. But a lot of people, we've had them here for years, so I'm not going to go down that road. Anybody have objection to 5?
5?
Number 5, yeah, because we crossed out 2.
I think it's a safety issue. I'm learning, so I would...
Chief, would you do me a favor and get the mic closer to and turn it on for me? Thank you.
What you're talking about is we don't have copies of this, and it's really hard to keep up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you guys did.
It was on the web.
Oh, it's not. It's not. It was the minutes. Everything else was...
My apologies.
That's not it. Matt, that's not there.
What's that?
This wasn't attached to the agenda?
Yes, it was. It was.
It's on the website.
Okay, there is, because I went online myself, it is there. However, just to make sure that we can solve this problem, can you pull it up for me?
Doing that.
Okay, if you guys will wait just a second, we'll pull it up so everybody can be seeing it. I'm sorry, I thought you all had this.
We're looking online right now. It's not there, Tracy. So you're discussing something that no one is seeing. And you didn't tell us we wouldn't discuss it.
Where are you looking at?
The same thing we've been following.
Don't look on the calendar, look under the agendas.
Under agendas, it'll be there.
Look under agendas. Did you look under agenda? We'll take a minute so you all can find it, and you pull it up on your phones if you like. If you look under the agenda, but it says commission meetings, it doesn't say workshops. If you go under that section, you'll forgive us, our village clerk is out, and that may be why I didn't get on the calendar. It usually is. But if you can go ahead under agendas and pull it up for me on your phones, for those of you who have your phones. Oh, we'll wait. That's no problem. Under agendas, look under 2019 commission meetings. That's where it was. I asked the same question. They couldn't, and there was an issue. You wanted to address that,
No, it's a
Manager?
commission workshop. That's where we've always put it
Okay.
for workshops.
All right. But normally we also put it on the calendar, but I think there was an issue on that.
Yes, there was an issue there.
There was an issue with the calendar because the clerk was out.
I'm on the homepage, the main menu, where?
Yeah,
on
it's
the
there
calendar.
now.
It's on the calendar now, too?
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Okay, so it's on the calendar.
From the calendar.
Yeah, Roseanne put it up there today.
People shouldn't have to think I've got to look at the first.
It's just where it's always been, but it's on both places. It's under agendas and the other, so it's in both. Did everybody find it okay? Most importantly, did everybody find it?
I can't get this on the screen. I'm trying to, but this, again, I don't do this normally. I have it here. I don't know how to pull it up on the actual screen. That's what I'm
Matt,
trying
did you
to
find it
do.
yet? No. Go to the calendar.
Well, now I'm on the calendar, I click on the 9th.
If it'll say the agenda, once you click on that, it'll pull up.
Why don't we read it?
This is where I've been going for the last couple of days. One why all it said was just Swale.
Okay, I'll read it out loud for now, because that's...
Clerk updated it today, that's why it's on the calendar now, so.
Okay.
I mean, I downloaded it on the 25th at 2:30 p.m.
Okay, so I'll just read it slower to make sure everybody's on the same page, okay? So number 2 was storage of vehicles on the swale is not permitted. That has been crossed out and eliminated. We went to number 5 because it's a similar issue that she had already brought up, which is commercial vehicles shall only be allowed to park temporarily on the swale abutting the property owner while servicing the property owner. No commercial vehicles shall be allowed to park on the swale overnight. Okay? And we'll come back to you. We're going to listen to everybody's comments on this, so you won't be left out on this, okay? The next thing we were moving to is property owners with swales contiguous to their properties. 3 and 4 has to do with... actually, I'm going to go to 6 first, and I'm going to tell you why, because 3 and 4 is going to get the most conversation. So I'm going to jump to 6 real quick so we can then move back to 3 and 4. 6 says all vehicles parked in the swale shall be parked parallel to the street and on the approved surface. Are there any objections to that? Parallel. So if this is my house, parallel. That's perpendicular, that's parallel.
Okay, we may run into an issue with that on some of the duplexes, which do not have enough space to do 4 cars parallel or multiple cars parallel like that. They may have to park perpendicular to the street.
Do you want to come back with some language that deals with that?
We can.
So that way we can accommodate what's existing now?
I think that's already existing in the,
But
I think that,
But I think Mr. Kennedy's point is that some of the ones that are parked parallel, we have to make sure that there's enough clearance in the street as well.
no, I agree with that, yes.
So I think, and I've seen those pictures, so.
Is there a law about how much clearance it has to be from the back end of the car to the street?
It should be 3 feet.
Is it?
Yeah. 36 inches.
So there, no, and I've seen it, and I agree with him. Those are issues. So maybe Mr. Hernandez and the chief, if you could be so kind as to look at those situations, and we'll get you the addresses for those and see what can be done. Because at the end of the day, I agree, those are sticking way too close out in the street. Okay, so 3 and 4 has to do with property owners with swales contiguous to the properties have owners' rights concerning swale parking abutting their property. Police, emergency vehicles, village utility and village staff vehicles, or municipal contract service vehicles may park on any of the village's right-of-way, including the swales, when performing the duties on behalf of the village and without the consent of the abutting property owner. The intent of this, which I support, the intent of this is that we had situations where, whether it's construction, which we attempted to address a bit in the previous one, but construction cars that are having construction for, a year and a half, or parking anywhere they wanted to. We had vendors who were pulling in other people's developed swales or undeveloped swales. There were situations of safety where people were just parking because they could, and then walking around the village and parking in people's swales. When I say people's swales, the issue is then it's owned by the city, but is there something we can do to support the homeowners from having some of these situations arise? One of them I heard was a problem where somebody developed it, didn't have enough parking, and so every single day for permanently until the people moved, basically they had too many cars, and so they were parking in the neighbors' basically lawns. And then the neighbor's responsible for fixing it, whether it's a developed swale, whether it's the grass. So when Mrs. Kuhl talked about ruts and so forth, if the person doing the ruts is not the property owner, but the property owner has to fix it and repair it, that didn't seem equitable either. So the idea was to find some sort of way to help the homeowner dealing with these situations. Having said that, I'm going to turn this over to staff.
The problem with this is enforcing. If we're going to be able to, well, for instance, say someone's parked on someone else's swale. Code could only address the homeowner. The homeowner would get, the code violation. Code Officer Caserta could not look up the title of the car, all of that. So then it becomes a police matter. We do not have the volume of police to be able to do this and regulate this continually. We could put up signs on every swale, but it would be at every parking spot, which is another whole problem of sign pollution before we could tow. And so enforceability of that would be a real issue.
I have a question, because this isn't, the first thing I did is back up and say, what is the problem, and is it significant enough? And the answer is it's significant enough if you're living next to it. It's not significant in terms of volume of numbers.
Okay.
So I would disagree that the number of calls or the amount of time that the police would be going out to these situations would be voluminous. That would create a situation. I do agree that when the chief explained to me that you'd have to signpost it, correct, Chief, every 100 feet or whatever what the rule was, that's not viable either.
Every 100 feet unless there's a driveway there.
Right, which is every. Yeah. So for me, I want to know, first of all, before we even go down this road, if there's support in the commission for this. Because while there was support in the previous commission, I don't know if there's support in this commission, so I'd like to ask that first before we even open that can of worms.
Okay.
So I do support it. Commissioner Wise?
Happens to me all the time. I support it.
You're in front of the park and you get this all the time, sir?
Yeah, no, I mean, you do a simple Google search on this issue, and I mean, it's an issue everywhere, and you hear the horror stories. I've experienced it as well. Somebody parks on your swale, destroys the grass. You're the one getting the notice violation. So, I mean, I guess what we're trying to do in this component is trying to figure out, it's not going to be a lot of instances coming up. So is there a way that we can, address this, given the size of our community? Is there a way that we can address this to help out some of these homeowners? Because it's not fair for them. They constantly have to go out there and resod their swell area because their neighbor decides to park on their neighbor's swell as opposed to their own swell. So either you ban parking on the swell altogether, which typically that's not going to happen, especially in this community where we need to develop some swell parking. So, I'd be interested to see, have staff look at it a little bit further and see if there is some way that we can help homeowners out with that.
Because the other thing is that if we're going to go down this idea of developing a swale, so somebody puts in a couple $1,000s to put in a developed swale, and then somebody's allowed to come and destroy it. And that may seem not obvious to you, but I can personally say that I went through that because I had several houses that were under construction. And the manager will tell you that they were able to park, anybody was able to park right in front of my house, and they did so for months. This wasn't a weekie. A neighbor I know now is moving. He had 3 construction projects next to him, and he literally couldn't take it anymore. He's had enough. And so I think there's enough situations, whether it's construction or Airbnbs or a variety of situations that will arise, that I do think we need to have something in place to do this. And I agree that we can't have sign pollution, but maybe there's a situation where if it's a reoccurring problem, this is not somebody parks in my driveway for an hour, I don't think he's going to bother or call on that. But if you get it every single day where somebody's doing this for either a long period of time, I think those are the situations where we need some sort of regress. And also to ask the homeowner to be financially responsible for damage that somebody else might do to their property is a problem. In my case, I already had an asphalt driveway that wasn't in the best shape, but I assure you by the time this was done, it needed to be replaced. And I'm not upset about that because I like my new driveway, but at the same time, I don't want to put that kind of cost on a homeowner, if that makes sense.
Well, I think, and I think some governments don't really address it. Local governments don't address it because maintenance of the swell area is the responsibility of the homeowner, which I wonder who came up with that idea. So, I mean, and that's where we kind of, if the village was responsible for it, and we were having to go out and repair swells and do this because some knucklehead wants to, park on their neighbor's grassy swell area, I think there would be, a little more hand-wringing and trying to figure out how to address it. So I think for the benefit of the homeowners, I think this is one of the things that we need to try to figure out some type of solution to it.
Go ahead.
See, the swale doesn't belong, I mean, I like the idea to help the residents, because I think that the city, I think the residents is, if the city is their swale, the city should be repairing it if it's damaged. I know we have this different discussion, but I really believe that to tell me that I have to repair something that I do not own is ridiculous. How are you going to enforce, because the swale is public, it means anybody can park there. I like you parking on my property, but I can't stop you unless you're doing where you're there.
I do have a solution. It's not the best solution, and I'm hoping staff will come up with a better one. I have expressed it already, and that is we could have signage that could be placed temporarily in an area where there's a reoccurring problem, and then there'd be time to resolve, and then the sign goes away. So this way, the owner's notified of the vehicle, not the owner of the property, and there's some sort of regress for the police to deal with. I don't think it's going to be a huge number of properties, so I don't think it's going to be voluminous enough to create a problem for the police department, and we could try and see. But I think that's an initial step that might work as an approach. I know the reason this came up is because there was one median that an individual decided that was their personal parking lot, despite the fact they had a full driveway. They had plenty of parking. They just wanted to be in the shade, I guess, and they had rutted up the complete median. And I know for a while they put up a sign in order to do that, and they dealt with it, and then they removed it, I believe. So I'm not suggesting this is ideal, but I'm trying to come up with some sort of regress because we're going to have situations that crop up, whether it's construction, Airbnbs, just somebody having like we had one person who likes to have parties frequently, and everybody parks all over the neighbors. Now, we know if they park and block you in, the police can do something about it, right, Chief? They block you in your own driveway and you can't get out.
Correct, that's private property.
Then, yeah, but if they go on the apron, for example, if they park on the apron and they're blocking your ability to get in and out,
Yes.
you can address that. But if they're parked somewhere else and you're not blocked, or if you're parked on a swale that's developed swale, you can't do anything about that.
Correct.
And then the other issue that I think David talked about, which I really appreciate, and that is, how do you know, like a homeowner, I think most homeowners may or may not know this, if somebody parks in your driveway, you can call and get it towed. You can call a tow company and they'll come take it away because it's on your private property. However, how do you know if you parallel parked, or for that matter, in Mr. Kennedy's case, when you're not parallel parked and you're perpendicularly parked, how much of that is swale and how much of that is personal property? Two tires are over on your personal property. What are you going to do, take a survey to figure that out? So it becomes very complex as to what you can and cannot tow. So I'd like it so that we had some help from the police so that people aren't making decisions on their own.
I want to be very, very careful here. I think we're crossing very, very dangerous, waters. First and foremost, I think that, legal opinions are going to probably be required in some of this stuff. That's first and foremost. Second, if there's a specific case where the homeowner wants a sign to prevent people from parking in front of their home, we would put a no parking sign, but that also will restrict that homeowner from parking there. And that would give us the capability to be able to enforce that, and people cannot park in front of that. But there's pros and cons that go with that. In order for, I think there's issues with restricting it to giving first right to the homeowner only, it's something where it would probably impact the whole block or the whole village, because you can't just do it for that one house.
If you did, and we talked about this, Chief, if you had, and this is something the community may or may not support, but I want to just put it out there and you can give feedback on it. But for example, if you required people to hang decals on their cars who are parked in the public right-of-way, those decals would have the number, street number, and house number. Then when you have an ordinance that does that, the only situation would be is then if somebody's parked there who's not supposed to be there. The truth is, nobody's going to call in this village. Nobody's going to call unless they're having a reoccurring problem. But it does require signage or stickers or something so the police know who's supposed to be there and who's not. It doesn't mean the police are going to drive up, find somebody who doesn't have a sticker and give them a ticket. I think the issue, because we don't have that kind of manpower, I think the issue for me is making sure that if I'm living next to a situation where I have a car parked every single day in that area, then that becomes an issue. I just think we need to find some homeowner relief for some folks.
And that's how we would address it. So I want to just clarify one thing. Manpower is always something that we focus on when we manage resources. But at the end of the day, with the resources we have, we will always provide superior policing services. I've said that since day one, and I will always say that. I want to separate two issues. One is resident parking, and the other one is no parking, where it's public. So we say you can't park here, you're damaging my swale and all that. So we got two paths, and I think that we need to look at this, get a legal opinion, make some determination so we don't wind up in violation of any ordinance, state statutes. There's areas, I've been reading up on statutes and everywhere, there's areas that I think we have issues. You're transferring rights, public rights, to give a preferential right to an individual. I think we're crossing, areas that could become an issue. That's why you see in a lot of places no parking, and you'll see the arrows going this way. And then you'll see areas where they have signage on the corners and then throughout the block. And then we're allowed to enforce. My job is to have the authority to be able to enforce. I will follow the law, whatever that law is, but it has to be within those guidelines. I just want to be very careful which direction we're going, because I think that it's just too different. We're talking about preferential rights, and then we're talking about just saying no parking. We want to address a parking issue, so we're going to put a no parking sign, and people.
I have a question for you, because I know South Beach is a great example of this, where they have resident-only parking, or they have visitor stickers for their visitors that can hang as resident. I don't think we're the only community, from what I'm reading, that's ever had this issue. I just would like to see if you could at least, and I think we can leave it at staff figuring out if they could come up with a solution that would work for us. And I'm very careful about saying the word Airbnb, because, as you know, we cannot regulate anything that would deter that. But I will use for example, when we had a couple hundred cars here, and the police did a phenomenal job taking care of that situation. We've had situations where people, I'll leave it at this. I think I'd like to see staff look into possibilities with the attorneys to see what can or cannot be done legally, and then maybe readdress it then.
And we've discussed this. I mean, in areas for events, we cover that under regulations that cover special events. In areas where for example, one of the big issues in the village is we have certain companies that will go ahead and do work in the village and have total disregard for the neighbors and for everybody, around. So what do we need to do? And we need to enforce the rules that we have on the books, and give the code enforcement the teeth they need to, but also to make sure we put what we've discussed here, rules about the MOTs, rules about stopping in the middle street, rules about being able to park. So if David's construction company wants to pull a permit, we're going to give them a hanger that says you can park. They got to give us a permit, the application, that will say how many vehicles, where they can park, what days are they doing the concrete pouring, special days, and where they're going to assign these parking, what's going to be enclosed. All of that has to be in the permit with a bond. I think if we put those rules in place, it will address, I feel so confident, it will address between 80 to 90%, if not much, a lot more of these issues that you were talking about, these, I just want to be careful. And you brought up the beach, Mayor, and if you go around the beach and you look at these areas, the sign pollution is pretty bad. And I'm very, being paramilitary, the way my discipline is, I follow directives that I'm given. So what the directives are and the laws are, I'm going to follow. But I just don't want us to go down a road that is not, we want to address specific problems, but we're going to address it so broad that it's going to create, and the other issue is with the neighbors, they have a visitor, it just, and we have these permit parking, we want to be careful.
Let me ask you this. We are getting ready to put in some things that will address 80% of it, which is the construction, which is what we all concur is the major portion of the problem.
Right.
I have no objection to putting that in place and see what other situations arise.
Correct.
And see if there needs to be a legislation at a point. I don't want to over-legislate either. Okay, so I have no problem personally with allowing that to happen first, see if that stops a lot of the issues that we're having sufficiently, and then as allow administration to come back to us and say, we've only gotten 3 complaints since then, and we've handled it this way, and we've solved the problem. I have no problem doing that.
And we
can, a better approach.
And we can also, just to make you feel a little bit, so you realize this is probably one of the most beautiful villages that are places that I've been around. I actually was looking around for a home. So one of the things that I was looking at is we do the sign pollution. It's because of the requirements that we're going to be restricted to, and there's certain places that try to get away with stuff, but they haven't been. It's about being challenged, and they're violating the law, and the law is clear. And we've pulled it. The Dade County, Miami Parking Authority, it's clear. If there's a problem in front of David's house, I'm just only picking at David, he doesn't live here. We can always go ahead, put a no parking sign in front of his home, or work, come up with a solution. We work with that, have that addressed, and then we move on from there. If there's an issue, when it comes to, like now with the traffic, we're trying a pilot program. We're going to put the temporary cushions. We've done like a holistic approach. David is painting the areas. We're doing different things. I think if we just go overboard with the signage thing, I think it's going to be an issue.
I think we're all in agreement up here that we do not want to see signs everywhere. Everybody agree with that? No. So I don't think there's anybody sitting in this room that would want that. So I have no objection to trying it and see where we are and revisit it if we need to, if there's no objection from fellow commissioners.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay? All right, open for public comments.
Chuck Ross. I'm very relieved to hear the conversation that just took place, because I was going to adamantly object to preferential use of the swales. I don't believe that, first of all, you'd have to get a legal opinion, as was said by the chief. I agree with him 100%. You're running into a very hybrid area. It's a public property. It's public use of the swales. It's preferential use, so this homeowner is going to have a particular right to this over other neighbors, and it could lead to problems with your neighbors. So you need to have it. You would need to have it vetted, and I don't want to go into it. If you're backing off of pushing for this, then I'm not going to.
Correct.
Is that what I'm hearing?
You heard the consensus? The consensus was to wait and see how the
okay,
new
because I can see a
rules
lot
deal.
of. There's only one city that does it in Miami-Dade County. It's Miami Springs. And I actually said this. I don't know if you remember about when you first brought it up about a year and a half ago. For my Crime Watch meetings, I have one of the officers that goes to the meetings is from Miami Springs. So when it came up, I talked to her, and she said, it's very difficult to enforce. You're going to have to put up signage, as we just talked about. Most of the people that they end up citing sometimes end up being residents. It just creates issues.
I think the chief came up with some possible solutions with those complaints.
I think that what the chief suggested sounded like some excellent ideas. So, having said, I'm glad to hear that you backed off of it. That's all I want to say. I do want to make a point though. Talking about parking in the swales, there's some things that we. Oh, sorry, Gary. There's some things that some issues that I'm not sure are addressed, but there's a restriction on how close you can park to stop signs, curbs, corners, fire hydrants, And I'm glad that you also brought up that you should have at least a 3-foot depth clearance so that pedestrians can either walk off or you can open a car door safely without fear of some car running, knocking your car door off your car. So those are things that need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to talk about you mentioned no commercial vehicles parking on the swale. There's a difference.
Overnight.
Overnight. And there seems to be a difference, the difference between commercial and a truck. Commercial can be a car or an SUV with, that's a business that has writing on it. When they did the parking, the number of cars, they indicated that you can have a certain number, each house, I think, can have 2 commercial vehicles in the driveway or at the house, parked in the front, before they have to go behind a fence. And you shouldn't restrict somebody who owns a commercial vehicle, not a big truck, a big panel truck, being able to park on the swale. And
so you want to differentiate between let's say a quarter or half-ton truck with writing on it versus a box truck.
Just saying a commercial vehicle isn't the same as saying a truck, and vice versa.
So you want to move it to class 2?
Well, you know something? You happen to look up different classes. Your truck happens to be a class 2. Yeah.
Half-ton is it considered?
Yeah. Your truck is a class 2. So you wouldn't be allowed to park on your swale overnight.
So
if you're talking about certain size, when I saw the class 2, almost everything's over a class 2.
Okay.
I think wasn't there language in the original one that I liked, because the commercial, I have an issue with the same thing. The commercial vehicle, that's too broad of a term.
Right. And under the parking provision, they describe that very clearly, the size truck. And it also says, if you have a truck that you're renting or you own that you need to park overnight and you can't fit it on your property or behind the fence, you are allowed to park it overnight. For example, a U-Haul, you're trying to fill it up and they're giving you that overnight parking ability. But it's in the code now, not under swale, it's under parking with SUVs and trucks and RVs, things like that. It's very clear.
So we're going to pull it now. Thank you. Actually, you have a copy of it.
The other problem I have is only parking parallel on the swale because of the duplexes, and there are a couple of oddball properties that have perpendicular parking. And I know your intent is good, that you want to have an extra 3 feet, but honestly, how would you ever enforce, if anybody wanted to just pull up and park next to the asphalt, the road, they could do it. They wouldn't have to leave the space. So, safety, part of it is pedestrian safety and just using common sense when you walk. The same as looking at cars backing out of driveways. So, we've all lived here a long time, and we haven't had accidents. I think people just, if they're walking in the street, it takes a little bit extra awareness that you're facing traffic and you step off the road. You don't expect a car to go around you, or wait before you get to the car that's parked before you proceed, so that you can step off on a clear space. So,
thank you. I'd like the Public Works Manager to address that, if I may.
Yeah. The minute we give them a permit and allow them to park on that specific location on the swale, the liabilities falls now on the village. So we need to make sure that there is a buffer. So when somebody parks, opens the door, they can't be opening a door and going into the driving surface lane. That's why that 3 feet is very crucial, because there needs to be a buffer. I also want to comment on what the chief said in reference to, the swales. I think that the first week, was it the first week, Christina, that you and I, when we met, you told me there was an issue. And what we did, we solved that issue by just going ahead and relocating a sign that said no parking. Exactly. So you had asked me, what do you think about this? And I looked at it quickly and I realized that the way to answer that was just to relocate the no parking sign. And I think that once we relocated that the parking sign, the issue was completely taken care of. So I think that what the chief said is a little bit more practical when we have an issue. Because if we see that somebody's parking in a particular location, that we see it's a safety issue, that's when we could address it much easier.
And Mayor, we're looking at a property right now. It's a truck, it's a pickup truck, parked on the swale, and we've gotten I don't know how many complaints with a boat, and we're having to make a determination of are we, and we're still going through some review if we're going to be forced to put a no parking in that area. What are we going? Because we're concerned with the the safety of.
Is that, if I'm not mistaken, that property has a very narrow, and there's another issue with narrow, correct? It's not a wide spot as well. If I'm
not sure what you.
116?
No.
Yeah, they do have a variance as well for their boat, and they also have a paved area on the swale.
And the
So
paved area, if I'm not mistaken, is only about, it's small. Right?
yeah, it's small.
Yeah, with the truck.
Which is part of the issue because it doesn't have enough.
Yeah, so when they're backing up, you have a boat, and so you got to go slow, just a fraction of a gap. Then they have to back further, and this truck is like right there. So, we're looking at. I mean, if they proceed with caution, they can get in and out of. They can get out of their driveway without an issue. But these are just cases that come up where we'll have to make a public safety decision with the manager and everybody. Is it going to warrant? Obviously, right now what we did is we had a conversation with the adjacent homeowner and said, listen, this is an issue, and can you cooperate with us in order for us, and then step 2, step 3, and so on. But yeah, some of these issues do
Case
come
by
up.
case.
Yeah.
I think that fits that non-cookie cutter problem. Go ahead, I'm sorry, Gary.
Thanks. Barbara said most of what I was going to say, but to the chief's point, some municipalities don't allow construction vehicles outside of the actual property. In other words, you can't park on the swale, you can't park on the median, and they have to park remotely and bring the workers in. And you might consider that, which, as the chief pointed out, would solve a big problem. The other thing is, as far as recurring instances where people are parking on other people's swales, I believe you do have a vehicle. Since it is public property, and if they're actually causing damage, it's the destruction of public property. And you might consider using that as a vehicle where somebody is really being abusive.
Thank you.
Ross again. The chief brought up some really good ideas on managing that issue rather than giving away public property to a particular property owner. And in the proposal that you were discussing here also, paragraph 5 talks about commercial vehicles only being allowed to park in the swale of the property that they're servicing. So that in itself would limit parking those commercial vehicles on all the neighbors' swales. When you were talking about commercial parking of commercial trucks, and there's a separate section of the code, which is Chapter 7, that deals with parking commercial vehicles in residential districts. That, of course, addresses parking those vehicles on private property. I don't think that there's anything in our code that permits commercial vehicles to be parked in the swale, and I would like to see it kept that way. Thank you.
When you say commercial vehicles, just to be clear, can you be more specific, because that is a generic term? You talking about box trucks or?
It's 7.5, parking of commercial vehicles, and it describes the category. For example, a category 2 is a vehicle that's 8 feet or less in height that displays external storage or mounted equipment. There are certain instances where those vehicles can be parked. They are not longer than 20 feet in length. And then there's another category, category 3, which is a more a higher caliber of commercial vehicle, which is not allowed to be parked anywhere, actually. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I have a question. Number 5, and the comments made me realize something. Commercial vehicles shall only be allowed to park temporarily in the swale, abutting the property owner while servicing the property owner. I know this kind of sounds like the landscapers, but now that we're discussing, right? I was just going there. So, to give from the enforcement aspect of it, how we would address this in a separate ordinance where we're more specific. How will we go about this?
I'm going to be honest with you. I struggle with this because I felt really bad. I came home from having my driveway done, and all the vehicles were parked on my neighbor's swale. And I remember just going, ugh. And then one of them was parked in the median. I mean, and I went home basically screaming at these guys to move their stuff. The neighbor came out and said, "Don't worry about it. It's fine." But I was upset because they hadn't asked, and I wasn't there. So I'm just going to give you an example of where I still believe that we need to look at this and explore it and perhaps expand it a bit and be more specific.
Yeah,
because there really is 2 separate issues, which is construction, which I think we addressed most of it in the last workshop that we had, but maybe we can move some of this with Officer Caserta's help and the Chief's help and Mr. Hernandez's help, move some of that to the construction. But you do have an issue for landscaping, and that is a really serious issue. We have to allow landscapers to service the community that they're in. And some of the streets allow it, some of them don't. So I do think we need to find a way to deal with that, and I really don't have a full answer in that. I personally would like to see staff come back with how they'd like to handle that.
Sometimes I'll get calls. I'll get called out for the landscapers. It's almost it's kind of tough for us, this call, but they'll park for a minute in the medium while they're servicing, and it's almost like for me, from my guys or myself to go out there and tell them, "Hey, listen, move your truck." I'm like, the street that they're going to service, they're going to block the entire street. So do we put cones and block the entire street, or do we have them block the street, or do we allow them to park in a couple of minutes? And
I think there was somebody had suggested, I think it was Mr. Hernandez, maybe doing a time, you said, where there's a time allowable for landscapers specifically, so that there isn't, because
correct. How we used to manage it over the other city I work with was that let's say they got there at 8:30, and we knew it was 8:30. So the enforcement officer will come in at 8:30 and put a chalk on their tire, a white chalk, right down 8:30. Comes back 3 hours later. He knows that they're supposed to be there 2 hours. He knows already, and the other enforcement officer will know they passed the time. So it will be a time issue. So I think that it would be better if we determine the time to be more flexible. I'm not saying it's 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, but it's something that gives us an opportunity of saying, well, they came and because at the same time, we want them to fix them.
There's another issue which is interesting. I have one lineman who services like 4 properties simultaneously. So they're there for most of the day. Yeah.
So it's a time issue, and I just think that we could come back and explore how we're going to approach this. But again, they are trying to do a service to the actual property owner. We're asking them to maintain the property.
I'm going to ask, if I may, to hold off on public comments. It's 9:15. I want to ask my colleagues, if I may. We have a whole other section, which is the landscape piece, which is separate. I will ask them how they'd like to proceed. Do you want to continue? Do you want to...
it's only 3 topics. I think we can move by 10 p.m. I just don't think
okay, if I would...
for anyone to...
Okay, hold one person at a time. So, Commissioner Wise.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Can't hear what you're saying.
No, you go ahead, please.
I was just saying, I think decent people go home and go to bed at 10 p.m. and if we can run through this in the next 45 minutes, we should do that. But
you're next.
I want to continue exactly where we're going. We're pretty good going the way we're going, so let's not change it.
Okay, so we have 40.
Yeah,
45
I don't wanna cut
minutes.
it short.
I just want a consensus among the commission and staff. Is that okay? Because it is your lives as well. We okay with that?
There's only 3 more
Ideally,
topics.
10 p.m. would be a good cutoff, but if we go, I'm fine going a few minutes past that. I want to just get these last 3 issues
Yeah.
Okay.
addressed, have residents comment on it because they're here tonight. I don't want to.
Mr. Kennedy, may I ask if we could get through this and then come back? Do you have anything else to add on this?
Very quick.
Is it okay? Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. So this will not prove to be a very popular comment, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think in this issue, I'm going to guess that everyone probably fundamentally agrees that regarding this whole issue of swales, regardless of what the topic is regarding swales, that they need to be safe, they need to deal with water, and they need to look better. And in an ideal world, if we all could wave a magic wand, there would be no cars anywhere on the swales in Biscayne Park. There would be no parking, there'd be no one parking on the grass, whatever. I think there's a really short way to get to this, and it reads like this. Swales may not be developed in any way except as driveway approaches with a maximum width determined by the driveway ordinance, and those must be permeable. As other developed swales deteriorate below X percentage, they must be removed and restored to green spaces at the expense of the property owner. Swales may not be used for parking. That is the long and short of it. Our swales are sacred. They're important. We recognize that. We value them, and we recognize that as a community. It's one of the things that sets us apart. Just save them. Beyond that, when there is a need, a property owner can go get an administrative variance or go through whatever processes there are, and there will be times that you will have to say, yes, septic, whatever, I don't know what all those things would be. When someone proves hardship or whatever it is, the language that you use legally, then you allow them to do it. But as you sit here and try to weed through this problem, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And I've lived here for 3 years. For 3 years, this has been a conversation. For the last 2 years, you guys sat on this, and I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but for 2 years, nothing. And now I'm back in a room where you're having these conversations again. It just seems kind of absurd, and you should just say, done.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we're going to move now to number 3, which is development of the swales, landscaping and maintenance standards. Components were, number 1, property owners are responsible, and I want to be, actually, before we do this, Mr. Manners, because you had attached some things, and then there were different versions set out, so if you could just go over that, of what was put in the packet, because I know that was something you were doing, so.
Absolutely, yeah. As different commissioners asked for different things, we had the Chapter 5 as amended from 2014 in the package, and then we had...
and that one was from a commission where it didn't pass, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And then we had...
3 commissions ago, if I'm not mistaken. Go ahead, sir.
Then we had the memorandum from the village attorney on off-street parking ordinance. And what I was trying to do, because this is a workshop and we were discussing it, what I was trying to do was provide more information for discussion.
Okay, this wasn't something
So-
that this commission put forth, or
No.
or the staff put forth? Okay. I just want to be clear so that people understand, just because it's in an agenda doesn't mean it's something that was work, that was previous work that had been done by previous commissions.
Because there's so many versions of all of this floating about that I tried to put, some of the most comprehensive and the legal opinions in here. And so that, the commission could look at these in advance, and residents as well, and make rational decisions tonight based on some of this. So.
And this was done, as 2014, that one. And then there was
Well,
another, and then there's the
2014,
actual code, right.
Right.
And then there's the actual code, which we have now.
Right.
That is in existence. Okay, having said that, these items 1, 2, and 3, this is a starting point. This is not anything that this commission has developed or even the previous commission has developed. So there were highlights taken from, I believe, the actual ordinance and some of the things that was discussed in our previous commission a little bit. So agree, disagree, it's all an open moving target here. Property owners are responsible for maintaining all landscaping material in the swale areas abutting their property, i.e. removal of dead trees, plants, and limbs. Landscaping material in the swale shall be maintained and free of debris by the property owner. Okay? Does anybody object to that statement?
I mean, it's a bit repetitive, but
Well, I think the issue of maintained free of debris, and the term of what debris is defined at legally will be really the ultimate purpose of that. And the reason why it was written in that way is because there was different ways to look at this. One is, the most restrictive thing was the 3 foot, and I'm going to let the Public Works Director jump in here. Originally, it was 3 feet clearance, complete clearance, and you guys can jump in any time as well. 3 feet clearance, if I'm not mistaken, then 5 foot, and then back to the 8 foot. Gary, could you do me a favor, because you're part of this, could you stand up and explain that to me, and everybody in the audience, because I know you had looked into that.
Well, to start with, it never went anywhere because it would be very difficult to enforce. The basic concept was to create a clear zone. So in reference to the concern for pedestrians that you would have a space outside of the pavement where people would be able to get off the road. And if it were, say, 5 or 6 feet, it would allow a car to pull off essentially the pavement, because cars really aren't that wide anymore. As far as the step back, like I said, it didn't have much support. It was an idea that was discussed, and it really kind of died in committee or at the group in the workshop, and certainly didn't progress to the commission. So I can't really support it.
No, that's fine. The reason I just asked because it was in the 2014 rather extensively. So that particular commission had gone through several renditions of the landscape ordinance, and that it ended up in there. So I just
correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that came out of the workshop. That strictly came out of the.
So basically, nobody wanted that. Okay.
Yeah.
The committee thought this would be an easy.
To put it bluntly, it was one person's idea.
Thank you. Could you tell me what the community, from what your experiences, did support, so that we have some background on that from your, because you went to all the workshops, Gary.
I don't think there was really a real. I don't think there was really a consensus, though. I don't think that we could talk about.
But I think that
go ahead.
The main thing was that people have lived here for a long time. The community's been around for a long time, and some people, say with a circular driveway, they have landscaping that goes out closer to the road, where and the island, the other ends are clear. Everybody had a different situation, and they didn't want their landscaping disrupted. They didn't want their things pulled out. They just wanted to be left alone. And, right now we have that clear zone. You have 3 feet, 6 feet. The one thing that I think happens sometimes, like on 8th Avenue, there are hedges that have been allowed to grow right up to the edge of the road, but that's enforcement. They should be told to take, we have that in the code now. That shouldn't be like that. But I think most people wanted their own unique landscaping, and they didn't want some cookie cutter look or have to take things out.
Thank you.
Well, it was just unenforceable. Go around with the yardstick.
Yeah, the
and try to
yardstick
measure that. But I think Barbara touched on a very serious point. You're concerned about a car encroaching on the side of the road, and that's 15, 20 feet long, even if it's a truck. And you do have properties here that have hedges that have been planted in the swale, from one end of the property to the other. That's serious. And we've confronted that ourselves in the evening.
Thank you so much, Gary. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Hernandez, who has his perspective. He's now driven around the village, and
I'll be honest. I'm just more. Again, I just go back to safety. That's why I want to keep. I wouldn't say much of a clear zone. I'm just saying a safety zone. That's really what it is. That's why I want to keep the 3 feet. So when somebody parks parallel, if we allow, they need to have that space to open that door. There's got to be space with the stop signs, how close you are to the corners, and there's got to be some way that I wouldn't call it clear zone. I would call it safety zone.
Well, let me back up. If you take the driveway out of this, which we addressed the 3 feet and agreed to that, and let's say you have no swale parking. Okay, you just have your swales are basically vegetated. What would you like to see, or what would you not see as an issue? I read some stuff about San Francisco, and and other areas where they're doing all sorts of things with vegetation that's not grass, that does the same thing for absorption. So my concern is safety first. Also, the streets vary so much. I think Barbara talked about that, whereas she's got this enormous wide median that people can pull over if they need to, whereas in other streets there's
Very
no
constrained.
median, and you have to pull over on the swale. And then if somebody's got it completely hedged up, you can't pull over. Like I have one part of 116th where the whole back is completely hedged up. You can't pull over at all. So it's always the same people's driving that gets run over when two cars have to pass. So back to the original question is, what would you like to see in a landscape, assuming the driveway is taken out of it? What would you like to see? That's why I support swale parking, to be honest, because in some situations it just makes it easier for people to pull over in really narrow streets. But what would you like to see, and how would we determine that? Because the other issue is you have, Gary, I think you said up to, Gary, what was the distance, 6 to 30 feet for the swales? I think you said 6 to 30 feet. Right. Okay.
I think like what we did today, me and Christina, that we look at each property and we determine. Today we looked at a property and we realized that, hey, there's a tree right on the. It's a vision problem, but it's a beautiful landscaping cluster of palms, but it's a vision problem. So it's hard for me to tell you presently, if we're going to create that. I'd rather just go back and maybe discuss it more with staff and how I want to move forward on it. I think that we need to be all on the same page on this one.
I think, does everybody, commission agree? Does every person on the commission agree that safety is the primary concern in this? Yes? Okay.
Oh, of course.
So, well, I'm just making sure. So whatever we do, that's the first priority.
Correct.
The second priority is realistically, with the configurations in the 1,300 homes or so that we have, and most of them have their own varied things, are we going to force that issue on existing vegetation, which I think is going to be an enforcement nightmare, or do we want to just go forward in any new construction that you create these zones? I have no problem if somebody puts a brand new house up or reconstruction, does a huge major remodel, asking people to have some issue of landscaping so we create that clear zone. But I do have an issue with trying to do this now with
I want to echo what Barbara said. I think Barbara's correct. I mean, it's a beautiful village. Why are we going to mess with people? I don't think that's the right approach. I think that the best approach is moving forward. If somebody's going to come and say, hey, listen, this is my corner and I'm going to plant, and that's when you moving forward. I don't think we need to be a little much more stricter, but I don't think
so for new. So
I agree for new, but for old, I rather work on a case by case basis.
All right, then
determining the safety first.
Then the next question. Well, let me do that first. Do we have a consensus that that's an agreeable approach?
Just going forward.
Going forward.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't. You know what? I don't think we have it. I think for decades the village never really thought much about pedestrian safety and where are people going to walk, and because I don't think we had the issues with the amount of cars on the road. Right. So we've kind of shackled ourselves to a certain extent because now we've allowed people over. I mean, not this commission or last, but for decades, to, and there are some homes. I'm gonna walk around the village. The vegetation is right about at the road edge, and so I'm walking to go to the park, and there's a car coming, and I'm like, going up into the bushes, or running across and getting to the median. So
it's true.
If I had a magic wand and I could, bing, I was Harry Potter. I would say make it sidewalks. But we've missed that boat. So it makes more sense going forward. I think that's really the only option we have. Otherwise, if we go to, residents now and start saying, hey, this hedge that's partway on the swell area, you got to rip that out. I think there's going to be a lot of issues
unless
that are
there's
going to come
a safety
up.
issue.
Unless there's a safety issue. There are some that, my personal opinion, need to be ripped out. There are some of them, and a resident may not like that. I'm happy to sit down with them if those properties are identified and tell them my personal opinion as commissioner why it should be ripped out. But some of it, there is a real safety issue. But for others, that are encroached, onto the swale area. We just got to make sure that there is a clear, safe area where pedestrians, walking their dogs, pushing a stroller can get off.
And I will tell you, go ahead, I'm sorry, Commissioner Smith.
I think if you approach the resident, if you explain to them this is blocking the view of cars, they will trim it back. Give you a perfect example. I won't go into the address on 18th Street. And the reason I know this is because that's one of my customers, and I happened to be there when he was doing it. His hedge came out to the thing, and code enforcement went over and spoke to them, and the guy did it. And we realized that it was going over to the swale. So I don't think we need to push regulation. I think if you approach the residents, now, the resident doesn't do it, then it's a different story. But if you talk to the residents, you'll find that they were there before.
Well, let me interject here for a minute, because that's exactly what I talked to Christina about today. I go, we looked at a couple of situations, and I said to Christina, it's easier to approach the property owner. And the property owner, hey, listen, this is a problem. You have 30 days, you got whatever. If push comes to shove, then I'll go ahead and take care of it, But Public Works can take care of it. But I think you're absolutely right, Commissioner. The approach is better to knock on that door, knock on that resident, explain to the resident, talk to the resident, because I'm sure we all could, look into it. But moving forward, I agree with the Commission that we need to set, a little bit more stricter standards.
Okay, with that, number 2 is kind of obvious. Landscape material in the swale should not constitute a safety hazard or limit access to utilities. That's kind of a no-brainer. The last one is no new plantings are permitted in the swales other than sod or approved ground cover. However, the village administration will work with the property owners regarding landscape solutions for corner lots who demonstrate reoccurring damage from vehicles to the sod and rutting associated with the turn radius. And there's a reason that's in there, and I know you're happy with that. And I also have the situation. And I, years ago, when nobody cared if you planted in the swale, I planted in the swale for that exact purpose. Because I planted palms at the time. Because I wanted not to change the visibility, but I also wanted large trucks or things that were higher not to be able to whip around the corner. And it honestly works. So what I wanted was something so that if you're expecting the homeowner to repair damages that are caused by vehicles rounding a corner, or if there's a turn radius issue and Public Works needs to deal with it, I wanted something there that would help the homeowner from doing that. That's reasonable, because you can't put anything else except the domes. And I can speak about the domes. They're buried, and I pick them up, and then they're buried, and then I pick them up, and it just doesn't work. So, and large trucks also, which I won't speak about too much today, but large trucks can cause damage. So, for me, I wanted something in there, and I put that in there. So, I put that in there where it says, however, from that point on, because I think we need to have something to help the homeowner out, and that can be something as a tree or something on that. So, I don't know what anybody's feelings on that.
Reasonable. Public Works is comfortable with the language.
Yeah, the only thing that that I also need to look at is proposed planting for the power lines, because
Right.
that I need to take also in consideration.
I think it should be a process in which there's an approved list, okay, where you're allowed to do certain things of certain dimensions that we know won't get bigger.
Correct.
And also that you go out there and say yes or no, because what'll happen is, and I've seen this 100 times, where somebody will put something in right under a power line because it's tiny when they plant it,
Yeah.
and then it goes on.
And I'm glad that's why I wanted to bring that up. That's been an issue. So those are the things that I'm going to be looking at. Make sure that doesn't happen moving forward.
Okay, I have no problem with that if that also includes the city can't put what they want to put out as well. I mean,
The city doesn't.
well, that's,
Oh, I see what you're saying. You want to make sure that
I mean, if you're saying that the homeowners can't do it, then the city can't do it.
Okay.
Okay. Well, you leave it out.
No, I don't have a problem with that.
You're pointing out that what you're doing here is you're saying the residents can't do it. And I think if you're going to say that, then you need to say that the city can't do it.
Okay, so you're saying that the city can't plant?
Well, no, what you're saying is you're saying that the property owner can only plant a certain amount of things. Plant a certain things. But that's not stopping the city to plant what they want to plant. I mean, you need to have the same rules that you're putting on to the property owner as the city.
The city doesn't plant in swales.
Huh?
We don't plant in
I didn't
swales.
say that we do, but you have to have it in the language that says you want to be sure that doesn't happen. Because suppose an administration comes from, says we want to plant it in swale. Well, you're going to be allowed to plant it in swale.
You can put language in there that protects the swales.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Hernandez probably has the better source to go to and come up with some type of language that would address that.
Yeah.
Because that would be more of a public works
Yeah.
issue.
That's all I'm asking, it's for language.
No problem.
If you're saying that the landowners can't do it, then the city should not be able to do it either.
All right, so that pretty much covers 3. Are there any public comments for number 3?
The city does plant in swales. We planted trees on the east side, live oak, a long time ago. And they're on the swales. Yeah.
Well, it's not in the medians or?
Not on the medians. It's on the swales. Right. Yeah. And hopefully we would do that more with streets that don't have medians to try to get more trees. The thing that bothers me with the way that was stated, I don't know if that's the intent, that are you saying residents from now on cannot plant anything else in their swales?
No, my understanding from the conversation that we're having, and I'm one of 5 here, or right now one of 4, is that the idea is that you would keep this idea of a clear zone for 3, and then go back, and there'd be some sort of regulation on that. I don't think we ironed out that.
So you just want more of a, don't plant anything closer than, say, like 3 feet to the pavement. And then and I agree that if trees go in, they should, the village should approve them, because that is a major problem, and you really need to do it on a case-by-case basis to see that if it's the right location and if it's the right type of tree.
Yeah, you know the challenge with that, and I come back to what David said, is most of the property owners don't know where their property ends and their swale begins, and so they go out there with a shovel and they think they've just bought a beautiful tree and they plant it, and then it ends up doing that. Gary, feel free to join in.
Okay.
I have a feeling Barbara
What
won't
was
mind.
the idea of the 5-foot setback or whatever you decide? Okay, that you wouldn't have shrubbery or major trees within that area.
Yeah.
And that 5 feet would allow cars to get off to the side.
And Dade County has a restriction. You can't plant closer than 7 feet to the pavement.
Well, the reason I ask that is because trees grow.
Right,
You
and that's
plant it
why
today, and it's at the 5-foot mark, but by the time you're finished, it's at the 3-foot
No,
mark.
it
So
should be set
at
at least 7 feet back.
You want to restrict the plant material, so you have a list of approved trees in certain locations.
And the size when they go in, so it's not
Yeah.
already violating before.
Do you, and this is a question, not a statement, do we want a process that does that so that it's done by the city and it's checked off, so that way we're not just having this?
There is a University of Florida and Florida Department of Environmental Protection put together a Florida-friendly landscape guide that maybe we should consider adopting with respect to certain species of trees and ground cover that we may want to look at and say, at a minimum, you could do this, and then if it goes to this...
It's a 40 or 60% rule, I think it is 60% native.
It varies, and it depends on what we're talking about, but it's Florida-friendly. And, depending on the height, again, above 3 feet or whatnot, then we could say, hey, the city has to approve it. So it's just something for food for thought to consider if we want to go that route.
I think we already adopted the Dade County.
The Dade County.
Dade County,
so we
but
followed that.
this is a different
I know, but
guide.
it's already part of, we don't have to do something new. It's an ordinance, you have to do it. And the planting within...
These are 2 separate different items, though. It's a Department
but
of
I'm just saying, we
Environmental
don't have
Protection.
to get too restrictive, and a lot of it has to do with the trees, so the wrong trees aren't put too close to the road, that before trees are put in, they check with the village. And it's just like for the power lines, for the where they're putting it, and the location that it's...
And
that
just
it
to be
isn't.
clear, we're not, I want to make sure we're staying on topic tonight, that we're talking about the swale specifically,
Right, the
and not
swales.
private property, just to be
Right.
clear.
But I think that planting trees on the swales, moving forward, the public works should, the village, probably through public works, should be able to...
So we
give
could do
it-
village manager or designee, so that way, depending on our staff and how things move around
Right.
here.
Right.
It's the same thing we do with painting. There's only certain colors that we can.
But I wouldn't restrict planting, you know, it says only sod or grass, and there are ground, it's, you know, sod is really yesterday. Today, we're looking towards grasses and things that aren't taking the kind of water that sod does. So I hate to just put in, you can only put sod and not ground cover. There are
I think it says Oracle. I think on the language it's Oracle.
Part of ground cover is in that document I'm talking about. Also, we got to consider the diameter of the trees and whatnot as well, as far as visibility.
So may we suggest that staff, and I'm sorry, Barbara, I'm going to let you finish. Maybe we suggest that staff come back with recommendations and make sure that Public Works and Code can both talk about how that would work. Because one of the things I also, and I'll point to my property because I can, and you guys can make me trim it, I will. I'm planted way back, but on the other hand, I have a frangipani and it moves over, right? So do we want the code officer sitting there measuring how far it's tilting? So I do think we have to have, I know you're going to love that. So I'm buying your tape measure. So I think we have to come up with situations where we have to be clear about what that means. Does it mean 3 feet all the way up or so forth? So I just want to make it clear so that whatever code is doing, they're not sitting there with a measuring stick.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Barbara, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
The tree's going to be a whole other issue.
Chief?
Trees and others.
Because even Dade County, the landscaping code Dade County, where it requires planting on private property, there's issues with the lot sizes about the type of tree you put in, given the root structure.
Exactly.
Too close to the...
Exactly, because if that's another thing that I want to, real quick, right. Sometimes with these trees and the roots, they'll go ahead and break some of these pipes that are down there, and it's or in private property or anything.
And they love something.
But that's the
And so with that, palm trees don't take a lot of roots, just saying. All right, so we're going to have to take the last comments if I may, and then we'll close it out for tonight. Thank you, sir.
Okay, real quickly, just, working on this landscaping part, just think about how enforcement is going to work, please, because it's a very frustrating process. We recently landscaped our swale, and it was something we actually went to the village and said, here's what we intend to do, and it was so loosey, and such a, trying to figure out what was going on, and basically was told, the basic answer was, at this point, look at the village. We couldn't possibly enforce anything. We'd have to go make everyone rip everything out. So it was before your time. So just make sure that enforcement is part of all of this as well, and that it's very clear to the homeowners, because we went and asked, we proactively said, what do we need to do here, and still couldn't get a clear answer from anybody.
Because it's not in the code.
It was very frustrating.
Because it's not in the code. Thank you, sir. You've been so patient, Linda. It's not the whole meeting.
Linda Dillon. This is just in general on the swale issue. I go out on 115th Street often in the morning, and we're allowing people to park on the swale on Griffin, and I'm sorry, not Griffin, on 6th Avenue, and they are literally blocking the oncoming traffic to where you can't see. So I would like to see more enforcement or something on that particular section
You talking
between
about landscaping?
114th and 115th.
Is that the landscaping companies with is that what you're referring to? Oh, parking on the swale.
They're parking on the swale, and it's blocking the traffic. You can't see the oncoming traffic on 6th Avenue.
Okay. Thank you very much, Linda. Anybody else?
I'm relieved at some of the decisions that have been made. But one thing I just want to remind us, well, at least my vision for Biscayne Park is more trees, more landscaping. And if it is possible, when you're going down 10th Avenue from North Miami, you've got a canopy of trees because they planted trees in the swale. And then you hit Biscayne Park and it's like a desert. There's nothing there. There's no canopy over the streets, and I think that just as we planted the oak trees over on the east or near the railroad tracks there, just on occasion, I think even residents should be encouraged, if it's safety and sightlines are okay, to plant trees on the swales so that you could have maybe a whole block of Royal Point siennas or something, or that we get some more canopy so that it looks more like Coconut Grove or Coral or Miami Shores.
I do want to make one caution, and I'll jump in here because I know you and I have talked about this. Is we do have to be careful with root structures and trees, because if we're going to be doing any type of repair and redoing our water pipes, gas pipes,
Yeah, I know.
and sewers, we've got to be cognizant of that. Because the utility right-of-way is supposed to be for utilities. I'm all for as many trees as we can have, but at the same time, we also have to be practical.
Yeah, but if you look at Miami Shores and so many other municipalities do have trees in their swales. So.
No, I'm not objecting, I'm just
I
saying
know.
we just have to keep that into consideration as well.
Okay.
Anything else? Anybody else? Okay, I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank everybody for sitting through a very long workshop. I really appreciate the comments. I'd like to finish by asking commissioners and staff if they have any additions.
Really quick, just the other day we had an incident where an 18-wheeler hit a tree branch up by here the day we were working on the butterfly garden. So, and then today we had another incident off of Griffin where they hit another commercial vehicle hit a branch and the cables and knocked down the pole, and that's why I've been checking my phone on. I don't know if the policemen are still there. I got to follow up, but they've been there since this morning. These
11:55.
Yeah, since these reserve officers.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when you make these decisions, it's important that I think the manager and the manager are involved to avoid things like this, because just for information, tonight we have 2 residents that are not going to have power. For sure, one of them, correct?
For sure one.
For sure, one, possibly another, a secondary, and it could have been avoided. We're gonna, those are things David is trying to address, but yeah.
And I want to thank the chief for the no through truck sign, which is maybe going to help with that a little bit, but obviously not today.
Yeah, we had that discussion on. I was having this discussion with David today because I was like, David, I know that that's managed by the state, correct? Griffin State, county, by the county, but I think public safety trumps certain things, and these trucks going through there, I think more than 50% or 60% of the cables that are running through there are extremely low, and if I think we have an obligation to deter incidents like this that could possibly cause the loss of life, and we were having this discussion on putting addressing the no through trucks, and then going if the county wants to fight us on it, we're going to say, okay, look, here's this report, here's enough is enough. This is a public safety issue.
I know that's coming
so
tomorrow.
That's the discussion we were having. I haven't had a chance to discuss it with the manager. My apologies. But yes.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody coming. With that, is there a motion to? Well, we don't have to. Do we have a motion? I guess we do. Motion to my announcements. Sorry, announcements. Quickly.
Yes. Wednesday, February 27th, 2019, 7 p.m. is Public Safety Advisory Board. Monday, March 4th, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. is the Planning and Zoning Advisory Board. Our next regular commission meeting will be held on Tuesday, March 5th, 2019 at 7 p.m.
And just want to shout out to those folks who have public safety concerns. We do have a new board, Public Safety Advisory Board, that's been working very hard to try and help with safety issues. Feel free to attend that meeting if you'd like. Did I miss something here? No, okay. Motion to adjourn? Second? All's in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.